Chapter 2108. It's all my fault. It's me who targeted the crown princess. It's me who repeatedly sent people to kill the crown princess. Gung Pengcheng's spiritual consciousness avatar let out a miserable shriek. Arbor looked at him expressionlessly and coldly. Now that things have come to this, you'd better confess the truth. Who exactly are you working for? Speak. She didn't believe this person's lies. If one were to talk about interactions, before she stepped into Shuntian Prefecture, she had never met the prefecture lord of Shuntian Prefecture in her previous life. What she was sure of was that a person could not develop hatred for no reason. Mo Lien's face was also cold as he enunciated each word. In the lower star domain, once you find this little lass, you must make sure that she doesn't have everything that goes her way, living like a piece of trash. She'll struggle at death's door like a dog and never see hope or end. She can't have the chance to go to the divine continent. Once any talent emerges, there's no need to wait for her to grow up miserably. Just obliterate her on the spot. These were memory fragments extracted from Lu Yiji's soul remembrance, and he still remembered each word very clearly. Now that he read it to Gung Pengcheng, his voice was low and pleasant, but even Endless Blade, who had very thick nerves, could hear the ruthlessness in his voice. Arbor suddenly smiled and nodded. His spiritual consciousness condensed into a sword and pierced straight through Gung Pengcheng's shoulder. I've always been very curious about how I've offended you. Why did you have to mess with me like this? Making me live a miserable life and struggling at death's door like a dog. Is this the perfect life path you guys planned for me? Who would have thought that after I crawled out of hell, I would no longer follow the path you guys planned for me? My life would be like a wild horse that broke free of its reins and completely broke away from your control. So, you didn't have the patience to wait for me to come to a miserable end. You were anxious to get rid of me, right? Cough cough cough. Gung Pengcheng's spiritual consciousness avatar completely withered and collapsed in the dungeon. His eyes lost focus as he muttered to himself, Don't kill me, don't kill me. You're from Tianyun, right? Arbor said coldly. Are Fan Choha and Fan Gu your subordinates? Gung Pengcheng shook his head in a daze. You still want to lie? Mo Lien couldn't help but get angry. You really won't cry until you see the coffin. Since that's the case, I'll roast your spiritual sense body for 49 days and turn you into a tonic for my purple flame divine fire. Gung Pengcheng's pupils constricted, and his mind completely cleared. He struggled and shouted, Your Highness, spare my life. Your Highness, spare my life. I, Old Gung, made a move on the crown princess in a moment of confusion. But before that, I didn't even know the true identity of the crown princess. That's why. Shut up. Mo Lien shouted angrily. I don't know his identity? These words might work on children, but not on them. From the time he and Jojo were betrothed to the completion of the wedding ceremony, everything was under the eyes of the world. If Shuntian Prefecture's prefecture lord wanted to keep an eye on Jojo, how could he not know these details? He was probably afraid that Jojo would grow, so he did it on purpose. A cluster of burning purple flames suddenly fell on Prefecture Lord Gung's spiritual consciousness avatar. The scorching flames coldly covered his body, and a feeling of ice and fire alternating gradually spread in his heart. That burning sensation was truly too unbearable. Chapter 2109. Manor Lord Gung roared loudly, rolling back and forth in the small dungeon wrapped in a layer of purple flames. Arbor watched coldly for a while, wondering inwardly, who on earth is it that made Gung Pengcheng suffer so much and still continues to protect him? She simply didn't believe that it was Gung Pengcheng's fault that he tried to kill her in both the past and present lives. How could there be love and hatred in this world for no reason? The person hiding behind him was too well hidden. Perhaps. Why don't we search his soul? Arbor turned to look at Mo Lien and Yuan Shurchen. Can we search his soul based on his current appearance? Yuan Shurchen nodded. We can, but after we search his soul, he'll soon die and will no longer be able to live in this world. Before Arbor could react, a tiny person huddled in a corner of the dungeon hastily crawled up and said anxiously, No, don't search my soul. My soul, you can't search it. Do you want to search it? No one would accept Geng Pengcheng's suggestion. Yuan Shurchen only turned to look at Arbor, her expression telling her to make the decision. Arbor nodded resolutely. Search. She wanted to see who it was that insisted on making enemies of her in both the past and present lives. Yuan Shurchen reached out her hand, and the dungeon was stuck to her palm. Geng Pengcheng's soul was trembling in fear. He kowtowed to Yuan Shurchen and said, "No, don't kill me, really don't kill me. I've confessed everything, please let me go." As a terrifying force cut into the depths of his soul, Geng Pengcheng's body of spiritual sense gradually became weak and transparent. His whole body was like a small white flower swaying in a storm, on the verge of collapse. He looked somewhat pitiful. Suddenly, Geng Pengcheng's soul let out an earth-shattering roar. Yuan Shurchen's body swayed slightly, and she actually retreated a few steps. Seeing this, Mo Lian supported him with one hand. With a wave of her sleeve, several purple flames soared and surrounded Geng Pengcheng, who was waiting for an opportunity to escape. Just now, because of the impact of the two forces, the earth pillars that were added to the prison had collectively disappeared. This cunning fellow had almost escaped. Yuan Shurchen shook his head and looked angrily at Geng Pengcheng. There are at least 9 restrictions in this person's consciousness. I can't search his soul for now. 9 restrictions? What was he guarding against? Xiao Mu's eyes narrowed slightly. The more this was the case, the more interested she was in the things hidden in this person's brain. This Shuntian Prefecture's prefecture lord was truly generous. Since that was the case, Arbor didn't want to talk to him anymore. He directly grabbed the person who was being burned by the purple flames. "Since you're so unafraid of death, then I'll let you suffer a total of 49 days of burning." After saying that, he no longer looked at that person happily and directly stuffed Geng Pengcheng back into the storage talisman. Yuan Shurchen smiled faintly. "I'm guessing that he won't be able to make it through tonight." Meanwhile, the Emperor of Zhangzhou was sitting on the throne with hundreds of steps high above. He was staring at the painting presented by the third prince with a gloomy expression. "Have you found out? It's true. The person that my fourth brother likes is probably the fiancé of the crown prince of the divine land." The Emperor of Zhangzhou only felt that his head was throbbing. His fourth son had come back. It didn't matter if he was not close to his old father. But now what had happened? Chapter 2110. The third prince even described the painting that Duan Yu had hidden under the desk with embellishment. In the end, he added, "This son also discovered this painting by accident. That woman truly has limpid autumn waters and jade-like bones, and her icy beauty is unique in the world. This fake painting probably didn't even bring out 40% of her charm. No wonder fourth brother would be so attentive to this beauty. It's just that this fourth brother is too ruthless to actually poison the original painting. One of eldest brother's personal attendants was implicated like this and died from the poison." While the third prince prattled on incessantly, Crown Prince Rong Li merely stood bare-handed in front of Zhangzhou's emperor without uttering a word. The second prince was all smiles as he looked up at the third prince from time to time, a meaningful smile on his lips. Their third brother, how should they describe his temperament? On the bright side, he was frank, but on the other hand, he was brainless, easily angered, and impulsive. The royal father's expression was truly unsightly. "Enough!" Zhangzhou's emperor shouted angrily and waved his hand at the eunuch on his left. "Go call old fourth over." Seeing the emperor's wrath, the third prince kept quiet out of fear. Zhangzhou's emperor turned to look at the silent crown prince and suddenly asked, "What is crown prince's opinion?" Crown Prince Rong Li stepped forward and bowed respectfully. "Royal father, this son believes that fourth brother's actions are truly a bit foolish. If it's as old third said, and fourth brother secretly hid the painting of the future crown princess of the divine province, then I'm afraid it's not conducive to the peaceful coexistence of Zhangzhou and the divine province. Nowadays, the situation in the world is changing unpredictably. Outside the 3 provinces, foreign countries and barbarian tribes frequently eye us covetously. Although Ming province and us established a peaceful alliance 100 years ago, the vicissitudes of life have changed many times since then. How can we know if Ming province is still as reliable as it was in the past?" Although the three provinces coexist, everyone knows that the divine province is the strongest. Even though the divine province experienced that coup many years ago, it still stands at the pinnacle of the world. This son earnestly requests royal father to issue a decree to select a consort for fourth brother. This son believes that fourth brother merely has a youthful temperament and is young and dissolute. In the future, if this matter can be settled, it will definitely be a blessing for our Tsang province. The Tsangzhou emperor looked at Rong Li thoughtfully, nodded, and turned to the second prince. Second prince, what do you think? I think the crown prince is right. Rong Li silently lowered his eyes and sneered in his heart. His second brother's temperament was completely different from his third brother's, but his ostrich-like behavior was something that he despised. At least third brother still had some guts. As for second brother, he couldn't help but chuckle. Your Majesty, the fourth prince has arrived. All of you can leave for now. Let fourth brother come in. Emperor Tsangzhou waved his hand. Your son will take his leave. Rong Li and the other two bowed, then turned and walked out of the hall. The three of them saw their fourth brother walk in through the 4 vermilion doors that were wide open. Beneath her peerlessly beautiful appearance, she was dressed in a moon-white robe. Her long hair hung down to her waist and was not tied up. She looked lazy and undisciplined, but her eyes were sharp. When Rong Li glanced at her, he felt a chill run down his spine. Why was her gaze so sharp and piercingly cold? Greetings, royal father. As the three of them left the hall, the 4 doors slowly closed. They could only vaguely hear their fourth brother's clear voice. Chapter 21:11. After Rong Li walked out of the hall, he glanced at his second brother and third brother but didn't speak. Third prince couldn't keep his composure, so he hastily grabbed Crown Prince Rong Li's sleeve as soon as he walked out of the hall. Eldest brother, what do you think royal father will do? Why did you say something about fourth brother taking a consort just now? Shouldn't we tell royal father to severely punish this person who doesn't know the severity of things? As his eldest brother, I naturally can't watch him continue to make mistakes. Rong Li smiled faintly. A person who bitterly loves the future crown princess of the divine province won't have a good ending. Third prince was fuming with rage. Shouldn't you be harshly complaining to royal father at a time like this? Mentioning those troublesome things means you're still pleading for leniency for him. If royal father really has the intention of taking a consort for him and marrying a young lady from a prestigious family, then wouldn't he look down on us brothers even more in the future? After all, he has already inherited the Devil Emperor's bloodline, and all the patrician families in Phoenix Emperor City are eagerly waiting to climb up the social ladder. Old third, don't fret over there. Second prince chuckled as he patted third prince's shoulder. He turned to the crown prince and said, Eldest brother, third brother, I obtained several bottles of excellent wine 2 days ago. I wonder if you two could do me the honor of drinking a few cups with us three brothers? You're still in the mood to drink? Third prince fumed with rage. The crown prince nodded with a smile. The main hall instantly sunk into silence. After Duan Yu entered, he merely gave a simple bow to the emperor before silently standing at the foot of the steps. The great emperor looked at him with an exasperated expression. After a while, he picked up the fake painting and threw it at Duan Yu. Look at it yourself. Duan Yu was baffled. He picked up the painting and scrutinized it for a long time before asking with a frown, Who is this? The emperor couldn't help but be amused. Old third told me that the person in this painting is your sweetheart. However, this painting is very average and can't even compare to 3/10 of that young lady. Duan Yu threw that painting to the ground with an indifferent expression. Just them? Worthy of a painting? Who knows what kind of dog's hit the person in this painting is? I don't know him. The great emperor roared, Rong Li. Royal father called this son over just to clarify the matter of this painting? Duan Yu couldn't help laughing in exasperation. Today, Imperial father called you over. Do you think Imperial father wants to reprimand you because of this painting? Duan Yu remained silent as he coldly gazed at the person sitting on the throne. You are my son. You are the prince of Tsang Prefecture. What can't you have if you want it? Do you think you can get what you want by looking at a painting all day long? Duan Yu's expression was a bit odd. He looked up at his own royal father and scrutinized him once more. The great emperor of the Zhangzhou continent looked like a man in his early 30s. Needless to say, the Rong family's appearance was outstanding. However, he thought that his imperial father, who was used to being high and mighty, would not be used to chatting with his son like this. Moreover, they were talking about inexplicable emotional matters. I can tell you with certainty that with your current cowardly appearance, you won't be able to obtain anything in the future, the great emperor of the Zhangzhou continent rebuked angrily. So what if she's the crown princess of the divine province? You're the son of my Zhangzhou continent's emperor. You don't lack any status. Wait. Chapter 21:12. If you don't fight or snatch, how will you obtain what you want? Zhangzhou's emperor said coldly. Duan Yu carefully scrutinized his father's expression. He felt like his father was a bit deranged right now and was in an extremely strange state. I don't want to fight, Duan Yu said indifferently. Duan Yu said very indifferently, do you think that everything in this world can be obtained by merely competing and robbing? But if you fight, you'll at least have a slim chance of survival. If you don't fight or snatch, you'll have nothing. Zhangzhou's emperor looked like he was exasperated at his son's failure to live up to his expectations as he sized up his foolish son. He looked like he couldn't get through, and just looking at him made him angry. Disappointing thing. You inherited the Devil Emperor's bloodline, so you'll definitely be the strongest person in our clan in the future. The entire Zhangzhou's future will be shouldered by you. Yet you can't even handle a little girl. Do you think you can get what you want by secretly drawing a painting and looking at it all day long? You're simply downright stupid. Duan Yu glanced at Zhangzhou's emperor. Royal father, you look like you can't get what you want. Did you not obtain the love of your life when you were young? Zhangzhou's emperor. You punk, father is telling you about your lousy affairs right now. What nonsense was he spouting? Duan Yu looked at him deeply. Royal father, you couldn't have fought with the current emperor of the divine province for a wife before, right? It had to be said that Duan Yu's words came true. Just by looking at Zhangzhou's ashen expression, Duan Yu knew that his guess was correct. No wonder he used that gaze to size him up. How was he sizing up Duan Yu? He was clearly looking at his past self. Duan Yu looked at Zhangzhou's emperor with a spurious smile and said, Royal father, don't overthink it. I won't walk the path of fighting. You probably fought and snatched back then, right? Duan Yu started stabbing his royal father's heart again. He coldly swept Zhangzhou's emperor a glance and said with a faint smile, but what's the use of fighting? Didn't you return disappointed in the end? You. Rong Xian felt like he was about to explode from anger because of his son. Poking at his sore spot in such a leisurely and indifferent manner was simply hateful. Emperor Zhangzhou seemed to see the back of the beautiful woman who had left him all those years ago. In that instant he actually stared blankly at Duan Yu. Duan Yu naturally wouldn't wait for him to recover his senses. Although he had followed his mother back to Tsong Prefecture, deep down he was still very resistant to the Tsong Prefecture emperor. After saying this, Duan Yu turned to walk out of the main hall. If there is nothing else, this son will take his leave first. The Zhangzhou emperor shot up from his seat and glared at his son. This unfilial son. He hadn't even finished speaking when his muddle-headed son hurriedly turned around and left. Was there such an urgent matter? Do you still have any respect for your father? Staring at Duan Yu's departing figure, the great emperor of Zhangzhou stared blankly for a long while before letting out a long sigh and slumping into his chair, somewhat dispirited. As far as the eye could see, the hall was completely empty. He didn't know why, but his heart also felt a little empty. In his hazy state, he seemed to be able to see that woman's beautiful smile swaying in front of him. The past was already in the past, and it was simply impossible to retrieve it. Chapter 21:13. After Duan Yu exited the main hall, he looked up at the afterglow of the setting sun before walking toward Taiji Palace. Compared to Taiji Palace, he actually preferred the slightly more remote South Chiao Hall. At least when he was in South Chiao Hall, he didn't feel as empty and frustrated as when he was in Taiji Palace. That Taiji Palace was too empty. He really didn't like it. He slowly walked along the towering palace walls. Duan Yu wasn't in a hurry at all, and his footsteps were also very slow. Suddenly, a person with a lowered head walked over from the corner of the palace walls and nearly bumped into him. Duan Yu swiftly retreated 2 steps to avoid this collision. The person was taken aback, and when he looked up at him, his eyes instantly emitting a glint. "Your Highness, Prince Qinshan." Duan Yu swept him a glance and discovered that it was the young royal guard who accompanied Wu Yong to escort him back to the palace. He was a bit irritated by his rash behavior. "Your Highness, Prince Qin, are you returning to Taiji Palace? How about this humble one send you back?" Duan Yu's figure flashed and floated past him. With his speed, if he wanted to get away from certain things, it was absolutely impossible for others to catch up to him. As a result, the young royal guard could only dazedly stay where he was and hang his head dejectedly. He only wanted to send His Highness off. Was this also wrong? Mai Qiao's section break. Yuan Shichen's conjecture was correct. It wasn't even night yet, but Shuntian Prefecture's prefecture Lord Gung Pengcheng, who had been tormented and shaken to his soul, was already impatient to confess. Arbor pulled him out of the storage talisman and coldly looked at him. "Speak." She had wasted nearly a day with this old man and was already very irritated, so she didn't feel like continuing to be long-winded with him. "I'll give you one last chance. Tell me everything you know, word for word." Spare me, spare me. Crown Princess, Your Highness the Crown Prince, can you first remove these layers of purple flames on this humble one's body?" He was simply about to be burned to death. These purple flames made him suffer immensely. In the end, even with his tenacious willpower, he was unable to resist this wave of trampling and could only submit to the little devil in front of him. A lowly prisoner actually dares to make conditions with this crown prince? Emo Lien gave a cold laugh. Purple flames appeared on his fingertips again. Seeing that he was about to increase the intensity of the flame, Gung Pengcheng's spiritual sense body immediately screamed in fear. I'll tell you. Gung Pengcheng knew that this matter could no longer be concealed even if he wanted to. Thus, under Emo Lien's cold gaze, she braced herself and said, "Crown Princess, you guessed it right. This lowly one has indeed been working for Master. It's just that this lowly one doesn't understand why Master must target the Crown Princess." "Who's your master?" Arbor felt like his heart was about to jump out of his chest when he asked. Soon. She was just half a step away from finding out who it was in her previous life that forced her to grow up according to their planned growth trajectory. This problem that had troubled her for so many years was about to be easily solved. "I don't know my master's name." Gung Pengcheng's words instantly made Arbor's heart sink. Seeing her unworried expression, Gung Pengcheng hurriedly added, "But he's definitely a man. Although I don't know his age and appearance. But from his voice, he's still quite young. I'll sleep and wake up to make up for it." Chapter 21:14. Every time he came to issue a mission, he would just stand there from afar, and a maidservant would come forward to explain clearly to us, "That's why I've only seen him a few times from afar. I really can't see his appearance clearly." Arbor's lips revealed a trace of mockery as he nodded and said, "Oh, are you sure?" I can be sure I can." Shuntian Prefecture's prefecture Lord Gung Pengcheng was like a frightened quail. He pretended to hug his transparent head with both hands and trembled as he said, "Crown Princess, this lowly one is absolutely not lying." Arbor's gaze became exceptionally deep and cold as he swept a glance at Gung Pengcheng. With a wave of his sleeve, he nodded and said, "At least you're sensible." The lotus-colored sleeve swept over Shuntian Prefecture's prefecture Lord Gung Pengcheng's head, shocking him so much that his old face turned pale. Originally, he thought that the little girl's move was to put him in a situation of total annihilation. However, it didn't. She didn't do anything. It was as if her sleeve really had carelessly brushed over his head. "Husband, it's getting late. Let's go back and rest." Emo Lien glanced at Gung Pengcheng and nodded. She held the little fellow's hand and walked out to the next room. Everyone also walked out one by one and returned to their respective rooms to rest. For a moment, the room was completely silent. Only Gung Pengcheng, who was placed on the table and locked in the dungeon, was left in a corner of the dungeon, muttering something to himself. It was night. The stars were completely hidden under the dark curtain of the sky. Outside, it started to drizzle again. These few days, it was as if they had entered the rainy season. Every few days, there would be a rainstorm. When they went out, they would always be wet, causing the number of small merchants and peddlers on the streets during the day to decrease by 2/3. At night, the streets were deserted. Gang Pengcheng sat in the dungeon with a dazed expression, his eyes somewhat blank. At this moment, a black shadow suddenly floated by outside the window and suddenly appeared in the room. Gang Pengcheng's spirit was roused. He opened his mouth to say something, but suddenly realized that no matter how he spoke, his voice seemed to be stuck in his throat. He couldn't even utter a single syllable. He tried to utter a few simple words, but to no avail. His spiritual sense body suddenly trembled, and a bad premonition slid through his heart. That vicious little girl did it on purpose. She deliberately left him alone in this room, using him as bait to catch her accomplice. She knew that someone would come. Gang Pengcheng was a little flustered. He wanted to rush to the front of the dungeon, but he waved his hands to signal the black-clothed man not to come over. But unexpectedly, a few pieces of earth and rocks fell from the top of the dungeon, smashing him down. His spiritual sense body was greatly damaged, and his whole body became more and more transparent and ethereal. He didn't even have the strength to move a finger. The black shadow did not hesitate for long. He had already arrived in front of the table and grabbed the dungeon with one hand. His sharp eyes glanced back, and with a whoosh, he went out of the window. Gang Pengcheng's heart was filled with anxiety, but he couldn't say anything. He could only watch as the man took him away along with the dungeon. After walking for about half a li, they entered an abandoned house. The man closed the door, and then looked down at Gang Pengcheng in the dungeon. He sneered and said, "You actually made yourself look like a ghost? TSK, you're really useless." Chapter 21:15. If Master hadn't sensed that your spiritual sense had been attacked by an external force and sensed that you might be in danger, I wouldn't have been able to find you. I wouldn't have followed that spiritual wave to find you. The black-clothed man crossed his arms and said coldly, "Gang Pengcheng, you're really getting worse and worse. You can't even deal with a few young people? What can you do on a normal day?" Gang Pengcheng still hadn't recovered. Sitting in the dungeon, he couldn't help but curse in his heart. Idiot, idiot, idiot. If those people were really young people, would it be possible for his soul to be seized by them? Could he have become as miserable as he was now? This person didn't even know that he was in a desperate situation. However, he couldn't even protect himself, let alone the person in front of him. Gang Pengcheng sighed. No wonder the little girl was willing to leave him in the room like this, and wasn't worried that he would leak the secret of her spiritual paradise. Because he couldn't do anything at all. If that girl had the secret of the spiritual paradise, and he couldn't reveal it to that person, then, in the future, that person might also suffer a great loss in the hands of that damned girl. Damn it. Gang Pengcheng was very depressed, but at this moment he was completely helpless. The black-clothed man in front of him continued to mock him. "If it wasn't for the fact that you still have some use, I think Master would have given you up. But you're already like this now. If you want to help Master accomplish anything, it's completely impossible." The black-clothed man sneered. "Who was that you in Shuntian Prefecture? Why aren't you talking? Could it be that you were smashed silly by those stones just now? Useless thing." At this point, the black-clothed man felt that there was something wrong with Gang Pengcheng. Because from the time they entered the room until now, a full half an hour had passed. And Gang Pengcheng hadn't said a word from beginning to end. Wasn't this a bit strange? "Gang Pengcheng, why aren't you talking?" Gang Pengcheng was suffering from speechlessness, and he couldn't point out anything to the fool in front of him. The black-clothed man frowned. He strolled to the table and lowered his head to look at Manor Lord Gang, who seemed to be on the verge of death. His eyes revealed traces of mockery. "What Manor Lord of Shuntian Prefecture? You can't even compare to me, a slave who follows Master. Back then, Master was really blind to actually choose such an ugly thing like you." A trace of anger flashed across Gang Pengcheng's eyes. If it wasn't for the fact that he had followed that person for so many years and was one of that person's rare confidants, He would have already done long ago. What? Gang Pengcheng couldn't help but smile bitterly. At this moment he couldn't even lift a finger, so how could he talk about punishing the arrogant person in front of him? Suddenly, Gang Pengcheng's eyes widened as he stared at the man's back with a strange and frightened expression. His mouth fell open. Seeing Gang Pengcheng's strange expression, the black-clothed man frowned in disdain. Don't worry, I won't kill you. I'll bring you back to see Master. As for how to deal with you, it's naturally up to Master to decide. As soon as the man finished speaking, he saw that Gang Pengcheng was still abnormally frightened. He couldn't help but snort coldly and wanted to say a few words of mockery to this former high and mighty manor lord of Shuntian Prefecture. Unexpectedly, an ice-cold hand reached out from behind him and firmly grasped his neck. Who is your master? A faint voice sounded from the side. Make up for yesterday's 2 chapters. Chapter 21:16. That person turned his neck stiffly and glanced to the side, only to see a plainly dressed young girl standing not far from him, coldly watching him. The black-clothed man made a sound that was similar to a turkey being twisted by its neck. Mo Lien glanced at him coldly and swept the black cloth on his face to the ground with a wave of her hand. This was the face of a commoner that wouldn't make a splash in a crowd. Arbor glanced at him coldly and took a few steps forward. A sharp white icicle suddenly appeared in her small hand. What do you want to do? The black-clothed man looked at her with a face full of terror, his entire body uncontrollably trembling. What do I want to do? Arbor glanced at him coldly and said expressionlessly, What do you think? That person's scream was instantly stuck in his throat when Mo Lien tightened her grip on his neck. The icicle in Arbor's hand had already slid down inch by inch from the back of that person's ear. Her hand that was used to using needles and knives didn't make any sound when she cut that person's skin. Her strength was also very fast and accurate, cutting down half an inch below that person's skin. The black-clothed man's neck was held in Mo Lien's hand and he couldn't even tremble if he wanted to. He could only stiffly hang in the air like a dead fish. Mo Lien very disdainfully extended her arm and pushed that person far away. She even knitted her brows and coldly said, Unbearably stinky. Xiao Mu blinked her large eyes and looked up at her dear husband. Her hand sped up, peeling off that person's fake face with a swish. TSK, you really don't know what's good for you. Kuchen chuckled and walked up to scrutinize the black-clothed person. And it's a woman. Wow, so impressive, so impressive. Let me see. Limitless Blade hurriedly came forward, admiring the woman in front of him as if he was watching a live animal. At this time, the man in black was already scared out of his wits. His whole body was trembling, and even his eyes had lost focus. He just looked at Arbor casually. Arbor was very impatient. He swept his palm over and landed heavily on that person's face. Stop pretending. Your acting is so bad. Do you still want people to believe you? The woman, whose eyes were originally unfocused, was slapped so hard that her left cheek swelled up, and her eyes became extremely fierce and evil. You little bitch. Shameless bitch. My master won't let you off. Just kill me. Don't even think about getting the slightest bit of information from me. She cursed like a madwoman, her eyes emitting traces of poisonous light. Mo Lien loosened her grip and threw the woman to the ground. She took a clean handkerchief and slowly wiped her hands. She threw the handkerchief at that person's feet, and a cluster of black flames instantly spread from the handkerchief, burning it to ashes. The fire also sprang up from the woman's feet and instantly enveloped her in layers of holy fire. The woman screamed in agony and rolled around on the ground. The black flames were very mysterious. They didn't burn anything in the room. They only enveloped the woman and roasted her with all their might, as if trying to drive her soul out of her body. Arbor pattered to her husband's side and raised a hand to calm him down. She didn't care what this woman was saying. Chapter 21:17. In any case, this person was already a dead person in her eyes. The woman rolled back and forth on the ground. At this moment, her face had already been burned beyond recognition, and there wasn't a single patch of skin left untouched. Enveloped in a layer of black flames, She reached out to touch her face in horror. When she touched her face, she discovered that her eyes, nose, and eyebrows were all on fire, and her face was in excruciating pain. The fire on her face was much smaller than the fire on her body. Like a frog being boiled in warm water, it continued to burn her face, but didn't go any further and turn her face into something like a pancake. Ah! The woman scurried and rolled all over the floor. Wherever she rolled, the people there would indifferently take a step back. They watched her perform her tumbling skills in the central room by herself. Arbor was speechless. He suddenly reached out and sprinkled a snow pearl, which whooshed down beside the woman. When the snow pearl touched the sacred fire, the layers of black flames enveloping the woman's body quickly and obediently retreated. Mo Lian's anger still hadn't subsided. She tightly gripped the little fellow's hand, and her voice contained a hint of anger. "Why did you save her? She doesn't know the difference between life and death. Just burn her alive." Arbor hurriedly reached out to comfort him. He blinked and said, "I still have something to ask her. You filthy woman, you lowly slut. I won't tell you anything. I definitely won't betray my master. You only know how to flaunt your prowess by relying on men. You bitch." A beam of wood spirit instantly struck her mouth, knocking out a mouthful of her teeth. "What do you want to hear from her if her mouth stinks?" Hichin said unhappily. Arbor saw the anger on everyone's faces. He couldn't help but wave his hand and say, "Why are you bickering with a dead person? Let me ask her first." But the woman, whose teeth had fallen out, felt that she couldn't even speak properly. She angrily snorted and said, "In your dreams. Didn't you say that I flaunt my prowess by relying on men? Then I'll give you a chance to challenge me," Arbor coldly interrupted her. "As long as you defeat me, I'll let you go. How about it?" The woman's expression froze, but she did not notice that behind her, Manor Head Gung was shaking his head vigorously. He couldn't speak, but he wanted to remind this woman. Arbor coldly glanced at Manor Head Gung, revealing a cold and resolute expression. "Gung Pengcheng, this old fox, still wants to trick me?" It was obvious that he wasn't telling the truth. He was quite loyal to the person behind him. If it wasn't for the fact that she felt that she wouldn't be able to dig out any useful information from Gung Pengcheng, why would she deliberately set up a small trap to lure him into the trap? Sure enough, leaving Gung Pengcheng in the room, someone really barged in like a fool that night. The woman in front of him didn't even seem to have half of Gung Pengcheng's intelligence. The woman hesitated, but she didn't turn around to look at Manor Head Gung, so she didn't notice the anxious look on Manor Head Gung's face as he silently called out to her. "All right, I promise you." The woman nodded heavily. Now, she could feel that the auras of the people around the girl were light, but their auras were extremely heavy. It was obvious that the people around her were all people with extremely high cultivations. And this damned girl in front of her was only relying on those people's power to be so arrogant and despotic. Master had already told them about this. That girl had been raised in the countryside since she was young. She was already extremely lucky to have been able to trigger her meridians in this lifetime. Chapter 21:18. Could it be that she was delusional enough to think she could break through to the spirit realm? Or even the god realm? Ha! Don't joke around. She was merely a good-for-nothing who was raised in the countryside. Without the help of those people with extremely high cultivation, what could she do? Gung Pengcheng's pupils abruptly contracted, and his expression changed from anxious to nervous to angry, embarrassed, and disappointed. Finally, his face turned ashen. If the woman in black was willing to turn her head to look at him, she would definitely find his appearance extremely fascinating. Meanwhile, Gung Pengcheng's current thoughts were, "Can't this damn idiot turn her head to look at me? It's too bad I can't speak." Manor Head Gung felt like he was about to suffocate to death. He glared angrily at that conceited woman and wished for nothing more than to howl at the sky. Idiot! Who would dare to provoke you like this if they didn't have some skill? Judging from this woman's disdainful attitude, it was obvious. She didn't care about the little stoic in front of her at all. She would definitely suffer a loss and be tricked right now. The two of them flew out of the dilapidated shack and stood in a small clearing in the front yard. This dilapidated residence was extremely dilapidated, and there was a small, abandoned nursery in the front yard. The woman's face was burned beyond recognition. She stood next to the abandoned nursery with narrowed eyes, glaring fiercely at Arbor in front of her. The woman took out a double-edged blade from her inner world with a wave of her hand. The sharp blade emitted a faint black light in the darkness. Don't blame the heavens and accuse others if you seek your own death. Arbor glanced at her coldly and didn't say anything. He reached out and grabbed the ferrule in his hand. It's still unknown who will win and who will lose. Don't be overconfident. You'll know whether I'm overconfident or not after we fight. The woman in black shouted angrily, and the double-edged blade was flung out of her hand with a whoosh. It spun in Arbor's direction. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. The sound of wind followed. Xiaomu didn't even dodge. Instead, she directly stretched out a small, lustrous hand and formed a spiritual energy defense circle around her, blocking the double-faced blade that was spinning rapidly toward her. The double-faced blade was blocked by the airflow, making it even harder for it to advance. However, it didn't last long against Arbor's spiritual power. It suddenly turned around and returned to the black-clothed woman's hand. The black-clothed woman's aura was extremely swift and fierce as she slashed out with her saber wind. Arbor didn't even look at her. With a slight movement of his body, he had already escaped from her saber wind. After a few times, the woman also knew that her movements were flexible, and her footwork was one of a kind in the world. If she relied solely on speed, it was absolutely impossible for her to catch up to this stoic face in front of her. The black-clothed woman's eyes flashed. Then, she threw out dozens of paper charms from under her sleeves. Then, she threw them in front of Arbor. All the talismans were shaken away in front of Arbor. The talisman power was vast and mighty, and it simultaneously pressed down on Arbor. Arbor didn't feel surprised, as if she had already seen through the woman's identity. She merely hooked the corners of her mouth coldly, and her fingers moved swiftly. Several hundred talismans were then flung out by her, and they all rushed toward the talisman power that was sweeping over. The black-clothed woman was completely stunned this time. She stood there dumbfounded in shock. What was going on? This little slut in front of her was actually a rare talisman master? If not, how could she have so many talismans on her body? Chapter 21:19. He casually tossed out hundreds of talismans, and all of them were released? A talisman master? Even a talisman master couldn't be so generous. How difficult was it for a talisman master to draw talismans? Even her master couldn't be so extravagant. It was as if it was a complete waste of resources. And how could a woman from the lower star region become a talisman master? This absolutely didn't make sense. The black-clothed woman's eyes trembled as she exclaimed, "You? How is this possible? Where did the talismans on you come from?" Arbor glanced at her coldly and said indifferently, "It has nothing to do with you. You're from a talisman patrician family, right?" Arbor's words weren't a question but a confirmation. A cold light flickered in the depths of her eyes as she tapped the ferrule in her hand. "Tell me, how should I deal with you?" The woman didn't speak, but the emotions flowing from her eyes had already revealed everything. She was indeed from a talisman patrician family. In a flash, a trace of coldness flitted across Arbor's eyes. "Go to hell." The black-clothed woman screamed in anger and humiliation. She abruptly took out a black talisman filled with many strange characters from her inner world. "Slut. Today, let me teach you a lesson. What is called ignorant arrogance and narrow-minded." With that, the talisman suddenly turned into a stream of light and flew in Arbor's direction. A puppet talisman. Arbor recognized it at a glance. Displaying one's slight skill in front of an expert, actually using a puppet talisman in front of her. Did she think a puppet talisman of this level would be able to trick her? Simply laughable. Arbor took a step forward and arrived in front of the black-clothed woman. She completely ignored the light from the talisman and directly flung her sleeve, sending her flying. The woman was immediately stunned. She simply didn't expect Arbor to be able to break the power of a talisman. How was this possible? This wasn't an ordinary talisman, but a puppet talisman. Who could break the power of a puppet talisman? Only that the black-clothed woman's pupils constricted and she almost cried out involuntarily, You're a charm master. You're a talisman master, ah. This slut was actually a terrifying existence like a charm master? Arbor's cold voice rang in her ears. Congratulations, you got it right. Let me show you what a charm is. Arbor coldly stared at the woman. With a wave of his sleeve, dozens of profound talismans flew out, turning into a dozen or so streaks of black light that rushed towards the woman. His speed was extremely shocking, causing the woman to be dazed and unable to move as she fell to the ground. Since her identity as a charm master had been exposed, there was no need for this woman to continue living. With a flick of her finger, Xiao Mu guided those several dozen streaks of light from talismans into the woman's body. How could the woman in black dodge? In the blink of an eye, she had already been hit by dozens of talisman lights. With a miserable howl, she slid along the ground and rolled several times. A gloomy chill emerged from the soles of his feet. This was a very frightening feeling. It wasn't ice cold, but a bone-chilling cold. This kind of cold was completely different from being attacked by a water spirit. The woman in black's entire body trembled, and she couldn't stop trembling from the depths of her bones. Chapter 21:20. She curled up into a ball and stared at Arbor with terrified eyes. No, that's impossible. How could this be? She had lost a mouthful of teeth to Hichin earlier, and now that the yin energy had entered her body, her speech became increasingly unclear. Arbor didn't waste any more words with her. She walked over to her with a cold expression and raised several dozen icicles in her hand. You can die now. Don't kill me. Don't kill me. The black-clothed woman shrieked, trembling. I can tell you who sent me. Don't kill me. Arbor's expression relaxed slightly. Yes, it really is a talisman patrician clan. It's that one from our Mu clan. The woman's throat was suddenly struck by a streak of black light. She fell backward and sprawled on the ground with a thump. Her eyes widened and her mouth gaped open. Beads of blood gurgled out of her throat, and in a flash, she lost all signs of life. Arbor abruptly turned her head and glared viciously at Gung Pengcheng in the dungeon. At this time, Shuntian Prefecture's prefecture Lord Gung Pengcheng had already swelled up in the dungeon. Not good, he's going to self-detonate his spiritual sense. Shichen flitted past and arrived in front of Xiao Mu. He grabbed her wrist and yanked her entire petite body backward. Mo Lien and the little Tai Sui had already joined forces and set up a defensive barrier in front of everyone. Let's go. Everyone quickly retreated. As for Gung Pengcheng, his faint soul projection had already swelled so much that it was impossible to make out his original appearance. What a prefecture, Lord Gung, Hichin sneered. This person is really courageous. How could an ordinary person be willing to self-detonate their spiritual sense and seek their own destruction? Once their spiritual sense self-detonated, not even a shard of their soul would be left behind. To put it bluntly, their entire person would disappear from the world. They wouldn't even have a chance to be reborn. In order to prevent the black-clothed woman from revealing the mastermind behind her actions, Gung Pengcheng had already done all this. For Gung Pengcheng to be able to reach such a level, it was truly impressive. Boom! Boom! Following the loud explosion, everyone felt the ground under their feet shake a few times. Dao Wuji and the others covered their eyes with their hands and took a few steps back. This kind of spiritual awareness self-detonation was more than 3 times stronger than the self-detonation of the main body. Gung Pengcheng, this little spirit master, had also fought to a certain extent. He wondered how the person behind the scenes whom he was trying so hard to protect had managed to subdue such a loyal person. Does the Divine Prefecture's talisman patrician family have anything to do with the heavenly fate cult? Little Tai Sui suddenly asked. Ma Yingchen shook her head. I can't be sure about this. There's no concrete evidence to prove that the talisman aristocratic family is related to the heavenly fate organization. Of course, in the future we might be able to prove it. Everyone turned to look at Arbor. They saw her pursing her lips tightly, and her stoic little face clearly had a very displeased expression. Jojo, now we can be absolutely sure that someone doesn't want you to return to the Mu family of Shenzhou. Mo Lien pulled on her little hand and said indifferently, this person has always been hiding in the Mu family of Shenzhou. Even if we investigate in the future, we have a definite direction. The follow-up is only a matter of time. Mo Lien's soft comforting words entered Arbor's ears. Hearing this, she nodded. After a long while, she said indifferently, I lost this round. Chapter 21-21. Everyone turned back to look at her in a daze. The little stoic pursed her lips and expressionlessly said, however, it's still unknown who will emerge victorious next time. She had indeed lost this time. She had wasted so much effort to capture these two people, but she was unable to pry anything substantial out of their mouths. That person from the Talisman family was truly a talent. He was an expert at using people and also an expert at wielding power. Presumably, there would naturally be a confrontation in the future. At that time, Arbor silently lowered her eyes. Just as she was lost in her thoughts, she heard Hu Shurchin sneer beside her. This K, you can't even rest in peace after death? He pointed over, and a green streak of light flew past Arbor with a whoosh and abruptly landed on a thin and faintly discernible lampwick-shaped fiery red object. After a soft sound, the light wick that couldn't be any fainter twisted slightly in front of everyone, and it instantly disappeared into nothingness. Geng Pengcheng's life lamp miniature? Arbor's heart skipped a beat. If Hu Shurchin hadn't acted in time and allowed Geng Pengcheng's miniature to bounce back, it would have definitely caused great waves. Hu Shurchin nodded. He could still leave behind a life lamp remnant after self-detonating his spiritual sense. Arbor's resentment toward this person increased. He truly spared no effort to sell his life to his master. He used the last of his essence blood to condense a life lamp remnant. Hu Shurchin sneered. Unfortunately, it fell short at the final stage. Arbor nodded. Her disgust toward Geng Pengcheng's disciple had already risen to the peak. Back then, I seemed to have wronged Mu Jingrui. Arbor said indifferently, I even thought that Mu Jingrui sent Fan Gu to kill me because I refused to return to the Mu family. From the looks of it now, it should be certain that this Fan Gu and Fan Qiuhe are also two small chess pieces in the hands of the mastermind behind the Mu family. She had lost this time. Although she was somewhat unwilling, a loss was a loss. The future was long, so let's wait and see. After tossing and turning for the better part of the night, everyone was a bit tired. Hence, they silently returned to the inn to continue resting. The next day, everyone woke up rather late. Only when the sun was high in the sky did they come downstairs one by one. Naturally, the little yellow crane did not know what had happened last night. She had been busy with Yunshue's cremation for the past 2 days. With everyone gathered, Fairy Yellow Crane fell silent for a moment before saying, I plan to return to the main residence. The Ginkgo Fairy's chopsticks paused, and she couldn't help but roll her eyes at her. I say, miss, are you tired of living? Do you want to throw yourself into a trap and go back to experience a bloody storm? I came out in a hurry that day, so I didn't pack my things. Arbor waved his hand disapprovingly. Just buy a new one. Fairy Yellow Crane pursed her lips and said hesitantly, I have 2 very precious handwritten copies of medical books. I was reading them in my room that day and forgot to put them in my inner world. Arbor was stunned and turned to look at her. I have a few handwritten copies too. Let me lend them to you. As he spoke, he took out one of Long Chuyun's handwritten copies and tossed it in front of Yellow Crane. Yellow Crane hurriedly and carefully received it. She flipped through 2 pages, and her eyes immediately lit up. After the meal, Yellow Crane held the book and read it as if she was intoxicated, ignoring everyone else. Jojo, can you lend me this medical book for 2 more days? Where is she? Chapter 21-22. When she raised her head, she discovered that Arbor had already left at some point. Jojo said he's lacking some mid-grade medicinal ingredients, so he dragged Emolien to the pharmacy to buy them. Yellow Crane Fairy asked with a puzzled expression, Jojo wants to refine pills? The Peony Fairy waved a small red brocade fan, lazily leaning on the armchair. Shaking the fan, she nodded and said, "Jojo seems to be lacking something. What is it called? 3 leaves, 3-leaf clover? Mid-grade medicinal ingredients? 3-leaf flower." Yellow Crane Fairy said with black lines on her forehead. "Ah, right, it's that 3-leaf flower." Yellow Crane suddenly stared blankly, excitedly grabbing Peony's hand and shouting, "Sister Peony, could it be that Jojo is refining spirit-gathering pills?" Peony was dumbfounded by her question. How could she know what kind of pill Arbor wanted to refine by buying that nuisance 3-leaf clover? However, being called sister by Yellow Crane, she was somewhat elated. Thus, she smiled amiably at Yellow Crane and said, "Probably, I'll go take a look." Yellow Crane Fairy immediately jumped up and said with a face full of excitement, Hey, come back. The Peony Fairy hurriedly reached out and grabbed her, pressing her back into the chair. "What are you going to do? The young couple is shopping, and you're going to be a lit candle. If boss sees you, he definitely won't be happy." Yellow Crane Fairy was a bit stunned by what she said. "Kiki, I just want to observe her refining pills and learn from her experience." "Hey, then wait for her to come back." The Peony Fairy rolled her eyes at her. "She can't stay on the street refining pills, right? Okay then. Then, Sister Peony, I'll go read first." The dazed Yellow Crane Fairy nodded, then picked up the medical book and read it as if she was intoxicated. The corner of Peony's mouth twitched, and she looked at her speechlessly. An ignorant and incompetent person like her would have a headache whenever she flipped open a book. There was no need to ask her to read books in this lifetime. It was impossible for her to be like Fairy Huang He, who was completely immersed in the medicine encyclopedia. That would be impossible, even in her next life. On the other side, Prince Mo and Miss Chow were strolling on the streets hand in hand, and they turned a blind eye to the gazes of the passers-by. The passers-by were also somewhat amused. A young lad who didn't look where he was walking and only stared at the little stoic actually bumped his head into someone else's shoulder pole. He rubbed his forehead in pain and was about to cry. When she saw a Liang Yuan medicine shop in the distance, Xiao Mu stopped and sniffed. "Lien, I smell a very fragrant radish biscuit." The little thing was hungry. Mo Lien couldn't help but laugh. She raised her hand to stroke the little fellow's head and pointed to the alley next to them. "Then I'll go and buy it, okay?" Miss Chiao nodded. "Then wait for me at the pharmacy." "Okay." Arbor naturally nodded cheerfully and agreed. After waving goodbye to Mo Lien, the little fellow walked toward Liang Yuan Pharmacy with light steps. This Liang Yuan Pharmacy was located in a troublesome area, so its business was naturally excellent. The pharmacy's shopkeeper was a rare person with a conscience. Even when the plants were withering and medicinal herbs were in short supply, he still insisted on not raising the price. As a result, many people from other cities came here especially to buy his medicinal herbs after hearing his reputation. As soon as Arbor walked through the door, a shop assistant immediately walked over with a face full of smiles and enthusiasm. "Hello, customer. Welcome. Chapter 21-23. When he saw Arbor's face clearly, the shop assistant was obviously stunned, and his attitude became even more respectful. "Miss, are you here to buy medicinal herbs?" Arbor nodded. "Do you have the 3-leaf flower?" Yes. The shop assistant nodded repeatedly. "How many do you want, miss?" "I'll take as many as you have," Arbor said indifferently. The shop assistant was immediately overjoyed. This was a big business opportunity. Thus, he hurriedly went to report to the shopkeeper. The shopkeeper jogged all the way over, his Mithra Buddha-like face filled with a kind smile. "Miss, our shop has more than 5,200 3-leaf flowers. 3 spirit coins per flower. Do you want all of them?" The 3-leaf flower was only a mid-grade medicinal herb, and 3 spirit coins was already a sky-high price. The shopkeeper was worried that Arbor would find it too expensive, so he added, "If Miss wants all of them at once, we'll round off the change. How about 15,000 spirit coins from Miss?" Arbor nodded. "Sure." The shopkeeper was overjoyed and hurriedly said to her, "Then Miss, please rest in the shop for a while. I'll instruct someone to bring all the 3-leaf flowers over." Arbor waved her hand. "I'll just walk around. You guys go ahead." The shopkeeper beamed and hurriedly brought the shop assistant to the warehouse in the back hall to prepare the 3-leaf flowers. Selling out all the 3-leaf flowers in a day was quite a big business. After all, mid-grade medicinal herbs like the 3-leaf flower were still commonly seen. Although the world's vegetation was withered, it was not a black-grade or sky-grade medicinal herb, so it was still relatively easy to find. Arbor had nothing to do, so she strolled around the shop. This Liang Yuan medicine shop was quite big, and it was divided into 2 floors. Naturally, the second floor sold some more expensive medicinal herbs. After Miss Chow walked around the first floor, she went up to the second floor to take a look. All the medicinal herbs on the second floor were listed in transparent crystal display cabinets. Many of them were kept in jade boxes, and their names were marked on them. They would not be easily shown to others unless you were sure that you wanted to buy the medicinal herb. Only then would the shopkeeper take out the jade box for you to see. After all, if every poor person came over and said that they wanted to look at the medicinal herbs and did not buy them after looking at them, the medicinal properties of these precious medicinal herbs would soon dissipate in the air. Arbor wandered in front of the display cabinets a few times, but didn't see anything he wanted. Just as he was about to leave, he suddenly noticed a plant with drooping leaves on an ordinary table next to the display case. She hurriedly walked over and circled around the small cabinet, secretly clicking her tongue in wonder. Wasn't this Tian Xingzi? She had seen it in Long Chuyun's notes. Tian Xingzi liked water and yin, but it had to be planted in water. If it was planted in a soil basin, wouldn't it speed up its death? Tian Xingzi's item was the main ingredient for making mystic-level neurotoxins. This neurotoxin could cause hallucinations to appear before the eyes of any soul master below level 10 after being poisoned. It was as if they were in a dream. After 4 hours, they would die with a slight smile on their face before they died. It was such a waste for such a useful neurotoxin to be thrown into a dirt basin. Miss Chiao circled around Tian Xingzi and raised her eyes to look at a shop assistant standing at the side. She waved at him and said, "Hey, wrap this up for me." "Yo, is this a gift?" A slightly aged female voice came from the side. Arbor turned around and saw a mother and daughter standing in front of the display case diagonally opposite her, looking at her. Chapter 21-24. Both of them looked wealthy and slightly plump. Their clothes were also very exquisite, and it could be seen that they were women from wealthy families. Arbor glanced at them and shook her head. "It's not a gift." The young woman's round face immediately revealed disdain. She stared at the Tian Xingzi with drooping leaves in front of Arbor and said, "This thing's leaves are drooping. It's already rotten." Arbor blinked and glanced at the Tian Xingzi again. She couldn't be bothered to pay attention to the mother and daughter and said to the shop assistant standing awkwardly at the side, "How much?" "Wrap it up." The young woman snickered. She moved closer to her mother and said disdainfully, "Mom, don't be like this in the future. Don't even ask about that kind of trash. If we're going to buy it, we'll buy the best. Don't buy this kind of trash. It's not like our family doesn't have money." That little stoic really looked like an immortal, but the things she did really made people look down on her. That, "Wrap it up, how much?" made her seem like a nouveau riche and bought something extremely precious. It was truly hilarious. It was only a pot of rotten vegetation. The young woman swept Arbor a disdainful glance. Arbor didn't take her contempt seriously. In any case, she knew best whether she had money or not. Why did she have to go around announcing to the world, "I have money, I have money"? She was simply like a moron that it was fine as long as she had a good life. As for what other people thought, what did it have to do with her? If they wanted to despise her, then despise her. She was bored to death. "Miss, this medicinal herb, cough, even our shopkeeper doesn't know what it is." The shop assistant scratched his head and said sincerely, "Are you sure you want to buy it? But it doesn't look like it can live for much longer." "It's fine, I'll buy it," Arbor said with a wave of her small hand. "How much?" "This, 1 spirit coin is enough." "No, I'd buy it." Arbor had the shop assistant wrap up the pot of Tian Xingzi. In reality, she was extremely happy on the inside. Fuck, a pot of neurotoxin's main catalyst was actually sold for 1 spirit coin. This is a kind of black-grade medicinal ingredient, dear. TSK, looks like I have to study more in the future. Only by studying more can I become cultured. Only by studying more can I not be deceived no matter where I go. The ancients didn't lie to me. The little fellow was secretly smug, but the mother and daughter kept looking at Arbor with strange eyes. The middle-aged woman felt that there was something wrong with the little stoic in front of her. Otherwise, why would he spend a spirit coin to buy a pot of dying unknown plants? What a joke! The young woman sneered, her face full of disapproval. Xiang. A man's voice came from the second floor. A young man walked up the stairs and quickly walked to Zhang Wuxiang's side. His face was filled with a doting smile. Those medicinal herbs have been packed. Is there anything else you like? Brother Wu. The young woman shyly took his hand and shook her head with a smile. It's almost done. We've bought everything we need. Wu Genie also nodded. His gaze suddenly landed on the little stoic, and for a moment he was dumbstruck as if he had seen a celestial being. Zhang Wuxiang couldn't help glaring angrily at Arbor. She shook Wu Genie's arm and stomped her feet, saying delicately, "Brother Wu, what are you looking at?" Chapter 21-25. Wu Jin also hurriedly regained his wits and couldn't resist sneaking a peek at the expressionless Arbor. He mumbled with a chuckle, "Nothing, nothing." Zhang Wuxiang couldn't help but feel resentful. She was originally a very average-looking woman, and her figure was also slightly plump. Normally, she was the one who chased after Wu Jin. Wu Jin was also the only son of Shuntian Prefecture's influential Heavenly Fortune Sect's faction master. If it weren't for the fact that her family background was comparable to his and that sect Master Wu valued their great Source Island's power, their marriage might not have been successful. She hadn't married into the family yet, but Wu Jin had several beautiful handmaidens by his side. Her appearance wasn't beautiful enough, and her figure wasn't graceful enough, so she naturally could only work on other aspects. For example, her pill refinement skills were definitely something that could make people sit up and take notice of her. Even the Wu family's father and son had no choice but to properly flatter her when they needed her help. "Brother Wu, let's go." Wu Jin also glanced at the little stoic again and said absent-mindedly, "Xiang, didn't you say earlier that you also took a fancy to a medicinal herb on the second floor? What's it called again? I think it's called soul-chasing. Soul-chasing grass." Zhang Wuxiang said with a smile, "It's too expensive. This yellow-grade medicinal herb costs 2,000 spirit coins. I thought about it and decided to pass." Zhang Wuxiang sighed and said, "After all, my current pill refinement skills haven't broken through to yellow grade yet. If I fail in refining, it'll be a considerable loss. Let's take a look in 3 months. At that time, my pill refinement skills might have already broken through to yellow grade." Okay. Wu Jin also nodded very happily and said, "If Dad knows that your pill refinement skills have broken through to yellow grade alchemist level, he'll definitely be very happy." Zhang Wuxiang nodded noncommittally and said with a smile, "I think so too." After saying that, she swept a glance at the little stoic who was still strolling around on the side and involuntarily sneered. So what if she was good-looking? She was still a brainless fellow. A pauper who was only fit to buy junk when shopping. The little stoic was merely waiting for her dear husband. In any case, she had nothing to do, so she strolled through the second floor again. Zhang Wuxiang saw that Wu Genie's eyes had been involuntarily attracted to them. She couldn't help but mock him coldly. "It's useless no matter how many times you walk around. If you don't have money, you still don't have money. Looking at them won't make them yours." Wu Jin was also stunned. He hurriedly pulled Zhang Wuxiang's sleeve and said rather awkwardly, "Xiang, others are shopping. It's inconvenient for us to disturb them. Let's go." "What are you buying?" Zhang Wuxiang sneered mockingly. She spent a long time choosing and only chose a pot of rotten leaves. He had already walked around the second floor 3 times. "Ha, a pot of rotten leaves for 1 spirit coin. That's all I can buy." When Wu Jin also saw the little stoic's gaze shoot towards him, he couldn't help but feel even more embarrassed. Zhang Wuxiang's mocking face was really ugly. It was other people's business whether they bought or not. Her mocking words were truly meddling in other people's business. Arbor glanced at her in boredom and walked to the side without consulting the shop assistant. She took that pot of Tian Xingzi from him and stored it into her inner world with a wave of her hand. The shop assistant still said rather awkwardly, "Miss, once our medicinal ingredients are sold, we don't accept returns." Arbor absent-mindedly glanced at that shop assistant. Chapter 21-26. Was she afraid that she would raise Tian Xingzi to death after returning home? Her heart ached for that one spirit coin and she would come back to find trouble with their pharmacy? Arbor was baffled. Was she such a senseless person? Even if she did raise him to death, it was just a matter of one spirit coin. Was it worth her making a trip back? Zhang Wuxiang sneered again. The little stoic turned to glance at her and rolled her eyes. "Woman, do you have a blocked nose? If you're sick, it's better to treat it as soon as possible. If the nose is blocked, the heat will descend, and the lung will descend. It's easy to develop lung disease. If you don't treat a minor illness, you'll suffer from a major illness. Let me give you a word of advice. Treat it properly." Madame Zhang and Zhang Wuxiang were instantly flabbergasted. After reacting for a while, Zhang Wuxiang said angrily, "What did you say? What kind of attitude are you speaking to me with? Do you know who I am?" What kind of attitude was this? Her attitude was too good. "I'm telling you. I'm the third miss of Hongyuan Island, Zhang Wuxiang. You better be careful. A bitch who doesn't filter her mouth won't live long." Arbor creased her brows. Why did the name Hongyuan Island sound a bit familiar? Xiang. Wu Jini hastily pulled back the impulsive and easily angered Zhang Wuxiang and said with a frown, "Stop fooling around." She was buying medicinal herbs for no reason, yet she was being a busybody and provoking her time and time again. Anyone would feel uncomfortable. When Zhang Wuxiang saw that Wu Jini kept speaking up for the little stoic, the fury in her heart swelled. Flustered and exasperated, she flung Wu Jini's hand away and shouted, "Brother Wu, why do you keep speaking up for that bitch? I'm the third miss of Hongyuan Island. She's just a country girl who popped out of nowhere, yet she dares to hoot in front of me. How can I not teach her a lesson? You don't have money, yet you're still pretending to be a big shot. You bought a pot of lousy plants and still think you're a nouveau riche. Simply." Zhang Wuxiang's voice suddenly stopped, and her eyes widened as she stared at the man in an ink robe who gradually appeared in front of her at the top of the stairs. Dressed in ink robes, his tall and slender figure, his exquisite features seemed to have stolen the heaven's fortune and could instantly steal another person's breath. Heavens, heavens! How could there be such a handsome man in the world? Compared to the man in the black shirt, Wu Jini, who was standing beside him, was simply too ordinary. If he were to fall into a crowd, he wouldn't even make a splash. Zhang Wuxiang stared fixedly at Emolien. That gaze of hers was as if she wanted to see a hole in his face. She had never seen such a beautiful man in her entire life. His slender and jade-like figure walked over like a flower parting a willow. For a moment, the scenery in front of her seemed to have lost its natural color. All that was left in her eyes was a smiling man. Xiao Mu's gaze landed completely on the packet of carrot pancakes that Emolien was carrying. She ran over with a cheer and hooked her arm around his, asking, "Hubby, why did you take so long to buy them?" She had already walked around the second floor 3 times out of boredom, but this guy was still late. Jojo was not happy. "Oh, I met 2 vicious dogs on the way, so I taught them a lesson. That's why I'm late." Emolien raised his hand and patted the little fellow's head. The 2 of them carried the radish pancakes to the side as if there was no one else around. They put the radish pancakes on the small cabinet where the Tian Xingzi potted plant was placed. Emolien opened the oiled paper wrapping outside and took out a hot radish pancake. He smiled and handed it to Arbor. "Here, try it." Chapter 21-27. The little fellow opened her mouth and took a small bite. It was hot, and she kept fanning her mouth with her little hand. She nodded and said, "Delicious?" Emolien nodded with a smile. Then she also took a bite of the radish pancake. My efforts were not in vain. The taste is not bad. Suddenly, an ear-piercing voice came from beside him. "Shameless." Xiang. Wu Jin was about to go crazy. In the past, Xiang was not so ignorant. Why was she meddling in other people's business today? That young master Mo Shan did not look like someone to be trifled with. Xiang Er's behavior was simply testing the bottom line of his patience. Xiao Mu turned her head to look at her and creased her brows in annoyance. She wrapped up the remaining carrot pancakes again and stuffed them into her inner world before pulling Mo Lian's hand to walk downstairs. "Hubby, let's go." There was no need to talk nonsense with a fool. It was simply a waste of his energy. "Let's wait downstairs. I bought a lot of medicinal herbs." A piece of lousy grass worth a spirit coin is called a lot of medicinal herbs? Xiang. Wu Jin impatiently said, "You are too outrageous." "Brother Wu." Zhang Wuxiang did not expect Wu Jin to reprimand her face. Her eyes were filled with tears. She cried out in grievance, "You actually said this about your fiancée for a shameless bitch. You are also bewitched by her, aren't you? Who does she think she is? I am the third miss of Hongyuan Island. That bitch looks like a vixen. What does she have to compare with me?" Mo Lian abruptly turned his head around, and two serene rays shot out from his pair of severe phoenix eyes. She gently waved her left hand, and a mighty palm wind slapped toward Zhang Wuxiang's face. Bam! Ah? Zhang Wuxiang flew out miserably. She staggered and crashed into a display case. Fortunately, the display case was very sturdy, and the crystal layer was quite thick. That was why she didn't break it. However, Zhang Wuxiang felt that her back was about to break. She cried out in pain as she clutched her waist. Wu Jin also hurried over, wanting to pull her up. Who would have thought that she would throw a tantrum on the ground and scream, "Mother, mother! Kill her! Kill that bitch for me!" The middle-aged woman's face turned green when she saw her daughter suffer such a huge loss. With a leap, he jumped down from the railing on the second floor and landed in the hall on the first floor. A few merchants who were selecting medicinal herbs at the side could not help but be startled by her sudden appearance. When they looked back, they saw an extremely vicious woman standing in the middle of the hall with a face full of resentment, glaring at the beautiful couple in front of her. "Do you want to die?" Mo Lian said coldly. While she was confronting the middle-aged woman, she did not forget to continue feeding the little fellow. "Junior, you sure talk big." The middle-aged woman's eyes flashed with a cold light as she said angrily, "You hurt my daughter, and you want to leave just like that? Madam Zhang, please stop." Wu Jin helped Zhang Wuxiang down the stairs and hastily advised, "This is Liangyuan medicine shop. It's not suitable for fighting." Zhang Wuxiang shrieked harshly, "Mother, kill that bitch, kill that bitch." The little stoic pulled Mo Lian's hand and took a bite of the radish pancake. She looked up at Zhang Wuxiang with a bored expression. She was simply a crazy woman. He didn't know which corner it had jumped out from. Chapter 2130. A handsome man in a purple robe entered the door. The moment he entered, he winked at Arbor and said with a grin, "Jojo?" Arbor couldn't help but be startled. The person who suddenly entered was actually Ding Yun, young Master Ding. This business of his was really spread all over Shuntian Prefecture. Mo Lian couldn't help but be amused by him. The cult master of the demonic sect is quite leisurely and refined. This business is quite diverse, from medicine to food, to underground fighting arenas. They really have everything you need. Well said, Ding Yun deliberately angered Mo Lian. He tilted his head at him and cupped his hands smugly. "Jojo, my shop, inside and out, up and down. If you like anything, just take it away." Arbor was expressionless. The shopkeeper wiped his sweat at the side and bowed obsequiously. "Young master." Ding Yun opened a golden fan with a swish and waved it in his hand as he turned to look at the shopkeeper. "Shopkeeper Chiu, what's going on? Someone informed me that someone is smashing things in the shop?" Shopkeeper Chiu hurriedly wiped his sweat again and nodded. "This is just a misunderstanding. Don't worry, young master. It's fine now." "Misunderstanding?" Young Master Ding snorted. His gaze swept across Madame Zhang and her daughter's faces. He waved his fan and asked, "Were they the ones looking for trouble?" Madame Zhang's face instantly turned the color of pig liver. "What have I usually taught you? Although we're a small business and must be kind to make money, there's no need to be too polite to some unreasonable people. Just chase them out. The shopkeeper couldn't help but wipe his cold sweat. He nodded with an emaciated expression and glanced at his young master. Sigh, he didn't know what was wrong with this young master today. He didn't believe that his young master didn't know the identities of Madame Zhang and Madame Zhang. He probably already investigated them on the way here. All right, let's get rid of the irrelevant people. A cheap medicine shop like ours won't run out of business. Ding Yun waved his hand and said, "There's no need to compromise with those who are looking for trouble." Madame Zhang was so angry that her nose twitched slightly. Zhang Wuxiang was also trembling all over. The handsome purple-clothed young master in front of them was naturally very good-looking, but the way he spoke and the way he looked at them with disdain was something that the mother and daughter of the Zhang clan could not accept. "How dare you!" Madame Zhang shouted. Her face turned red instantly. Zhang Wuxiang's entire body was trembling. She pointed at Ding Yun and shrieked, "How can you chase a guest out? Your pharmacy, do you not plan to mingle in Shuntian Prefecture in the future?" Ding Yun coldly glanced at the woman. "Scram before I lose my temper." Zhang Wuxiang shrieked, and the jealousy in her heart surged forth. She pointed at the little stoic, who was standing to the side nibbling on a radish pancake, and shrieked as if she had lost all reason, "Shameless thing! If it weren't for you, how could we possibly be chased out by someone?" As soon as she finished speaking, Ding Yun swept Zhang Wuxiang with his sleeve, and she felt a powerful force press against her chest. She spat out a mouthful of blood with a pft, and was sent flying toward the shelf behind her. "Hey, hey!" The shopkeeper was about to die from fright. He hurriedly threw out a rope to hold Zhang Wuxiang's body, preventing her from heavily crashing into the medicine cabinet behind her. Otherwise, the whole cabinet of medicinal herbs would probably suffer a calamity. Chapter 2131. Cough cough. Zhang Wuxiang reached out to touch the traces of blood on the side of her lips and shrieked, You actually dared to lay your hands on me." She was so angry that she was like a little white flower withering in the wind. She swayed and swayed, shaking so much that her eyeballs were about to fall to the ground. Arbor swallowed a mouthful of the radish pancake and looked at the girl with a blank expression. She didn't understand how she could be so magnanimous. She shook her head and said in a cold voice, "Being too angry is harmful to the body. It affects the spleen, stomach, and liver fire. It's really unwise. If you're sick, you still have to be treated as soon as possible. Otherwise, if it drags on for too long, there won't be any way to reverse the situation." Everyone, Mo Lien couldn't help but twitch his mouth. He didn't know whether to laugh or cry as he raised his hand to rub his wifey's head. Why did it feel so funny? While others were half dead from anger, this little fellow started from medical knowledge and expressionlessly reminded others to pay attention to their health. Her explanation was really clear and logical. At least, she could scare many laymen into a daze. Young Master Ding couldn't help but laugh out loud. He floated to Arbor's side and looked at her with a smile. "Jojo, I'll give you all the medicinal herbs in the shop." The shopkeeper fell to the ground with a bang. "Oh my, his young master. Is there anyone who squanders like you? With such a squandering method, no matter how much money you have, it won't be enough for you to squander." "No need." Mo Lien held his wifey's left hand tightly. He lowered his other hand by half an inch and flipped his palm downwards. Immediately, a crisp ding-ding-dang-dang sound was heard. Pieces of spirit coins flowed from his fingers like a gurgling stream, sliding down endlessly. The ding-ding-dang-dang-dang sound lasted for about half an incense stick's time. At this time, the floor of the lobby was already covered with a thick layer of spirit coins. Everyone, exclamation point, they stared at him dumbstruck for a long time, so long that they almost didn't know what to say. The coins were still flowing out endlessly, flowing over everyone's feet and gradually overflowing to their calves. Zhang Wuxiang, who was lying on the ground, was completely shocked by the crown prince's actions. She could only push the spirit coins away with all her might to prevent herself from being completely buried under the pile of spirit coins. Madame Zhang's expression was even more hilarious. She opened her mouth wide and stared blankly at Emolien, as if she wanted to see a flower in her face. Her gaze wandered up and down, as if she was looking at a monster from another planet. Young Master Ding gloomily stared at Prince Emo in front of him. His gloominess turned to viciousness, and then to anger. Enough. This damned man, was he trying to use money to kill him? Enough. Seeing that the Crown Prince had no intention of stopping, young Master Ding roared angrily, "It's already enough to pay for all the medicinal herbs." Everyone stared at Tycoon Lien with a dumbfounded expression. They never thought that they would be able to see such a marvelous scene in a shop in their lifetime. He spent a lot of money to buy all the medicinal herbs on both the upper and lower floors for his wife. Was he still human? Was this something a human could do? Everyone's minds were muddled, and their faces were also dazed. They kept feeling that if they let this young master continue being extravagant, their hearts would definitely not be able to take it. Arbor blinked and lowered his head to look at the spirit coins that flowed to his calves. She moved her small feet and kicked the spirit coins on her feet to the side. Chapter 2132. Xiao Mu looked up at her dear husband and asked in bewilderment, "Hubby, what are you doing?" "Give them all to Jojo." Emolien lowered her head and said to her. With a strange expression, Arbor looked at the spirit coins on the ground, then looked up at young Master Ding, whose face was green with dog poop. "I don't want them." Everyone. Oh my God. This couple was so willful. Not only did he spend such a large amount of spirit coins to buy all the medicinal herbs, but he also scared everyone present so much that they almost couldn't breathe. The other one was even more ruthless. She actually said she didn't want them. "Why?" Emolien raised her hand and patted the little fellow's head. "Don't you like medicinal herbs the most?" "There are too many, I can't put them all," Arbor quickly said. She had planted all kinds of medicinal herbs in her herb garden on Paradise Planet. Now that she had bought such a large batch of miscellaneous medicinal herbs, where should she put them? "It's okay, you can put them in the talisman. If you don't like them, you can throw them away." Prince Imo reached out and hugged her. Then he turned his head, his expression changing very skillfully. In the blink of an eye, the gentle young sir turned into the lofty Crown Prince Imo with a dark and gloomy face. "What are you spacing out for? Go get the medicinal herbs." "Ah, yes, 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 yes." The shopkeeper of the herb shop felt like he was going crazy. In his heart, he was definitely cursing. Where did these two weirdos come from? The two masters were fighting. Couldn't they take into consideration the feelings of the commoners? Could they not be so fierce? Arbor could only sigh helplessly and said to the little water child in the depths of her conscience, "Dian Dian, are all men so childish?" The little water child hurriedly said, Master, you're right. Men like to fight fiercely. They're not cute at all, are they?" Arbor nodded. She couldn't help but ask, "Do you think you'll take the form of a man or a woman after you transform? You'd better transform into a girl. It's less annoying." The little water child. "Master, I'm sorry to disappoint you." That the little water baby ran away in tears. She didn't think too much about it when the water baby suddenly stopped talking. She just thought that the water baby had gone to do something else. Arbor kicked the spirit coins under his feet and followed shopkeeper Chio for a few steps. Then he sighed and said, "Don't bother, I'll take it myself." With so many medicinal ingredients, he could only store them in his storage talisman. His inner world simply couldn't hold them all. Furthermore, one storage talisman was not enough. 10 empty blue storage talismans floated out from Xiao Mu's side and swept towards the items inside the hall with a swish. The other 10 flew directly to the second floor. Not long after, shopkeeper Chio ran down the stairs with a strange expression on his face. He looked at the expressionless little stoic, then looked at his young master's dark face. "Kufmasei, you took away all the display cases and medicine cabinets. This crazy girl didn't even leave them a single strand of hair." At this moment, there was nothing but the 4 walls upstairs and downstairs, that even the candlesticks and vases in the corner were taken away by the young lady. Everyone. Why did they feel like the young lady was a swindler? "If I didn't take them away, how could I store the medicinal ingredients?" Could it be that I'm going to take them all in a mess? Arbor retorted angrily. Besides, can your cabinets and lamps be more expensive than the medicinal ingredients? I even bought the medicinal ingredients. Why can't I take something else? Chapter 2133. Everyone. Prince Emo turned his head and saw his wife's expression change instantly. He chuckled and praised his wife repeatedly. Right. If it's not enough, I'll just add more money. Everyone. They vaguely knew where this girl's temperament came from. The shopkeeper still wanted to argue for a few more words, but after being glared at by young Master Ding, he immediately fell silent and lowered his head. Boo-hoo, it was hard to be a shopkeeper these days. It was even harder to deal with such a willful young master. The mother and daughter of the Zhang family were completely silent now, and they didn't want to say anything. What should they say? They would be laughed at no matter what they said. Just now, they were still mocking others for being poor and only taking a lousy herb worth 1 spirit coin. Miss Zhang even mocked others with a condescending expression, as if it was a crime for poor people to go shopping. But now, he had been slapped in the face so hard that he didn't want to be slapped. Wu Genie also felt extremely embarrassed. He glanced at Prince Emo, who had a spring breeze on his face, and then looked at young Master Ding, who had a gloomy expression and a face as black as the bottom of a pot. He cleared his throat and couldn't help but say, Madame Zhang, Xiang, I think we should go back first. Zhang Wuxiang felt that she had lost so much face in front of others. At this time, she was so embarrassed that she couldn't even raise her head. When she heard Wu Genie's voice, she simply couldn't vent her anger. Look at her stoic-faced husband. If he didn't make a move, she would have thought he was a pretty boy. Once he made a move, she knew he was a tycoon who doted on his wife. Then she compared him to this cowardly and mediocre fiancé beside her. There was no comparison at all. She angrily brushed away Wu Genie's hand. Go away. Xiang. Madame Zhang glared at Zhang Wuxiang warningly. Don't make trouble again. At this moment, she could tell that Emo Lian's identity was definitely not ordinary. There weren't such outstanding young masters everywhere in the world, and it was even more impossible to randomly pick a tycoon who could give away tens of millions of spirit coins. Therefore, the most important thing now was to leave quickly so that they wouldn't be taken advantage of again. Mother! Zhang Wuxiang's heart was filled with unwillingness. She reached out and pounded the pile of spirit coins on the ground. The spirit coin bounced up and almost flew into her face. She was so angry that her ordinary face was completely distorted. She was ridiculed and humiliated like this, and at the same time, she was beaten up like a dog by 2 men. Her mother and fiancé actually turned a blind eye to it and didn't help her at all. Especially her fiancé, he was simply a good-for-nothing donkey. Xiang Madame Zhang rebuked angrily. Wu Jin hurriedly reached out to help Zhang Wuxiang up and whispered to her, These people are not ordinary people. Let's return to the residence first and investigate their identities before we make further plans. Zhang Wuxiang gritted her teeth and glared at Wu Jini hatefully. Suddenly, a dozen or so servants rushed in from the medicine shop's entrance. The sound of rolling iron wheelchairs followed. Why are you here? Zhang Wuxiang stared at the wheelchair that came in through the door, a trace of disgust in her eyes. Madame Zhang reached out and lightly patted Zhang Wuxiang's head. How can you talk to your second brother like that? Along with the wheelchair came a young man with a gloomy face. He pointed in Emolien's direction and said sternly, Come, arrest this man. Chapter 2135. The little stoic even ordered people to throw the 2 of them into the sea to feed the sharks. In the end, due to the ship's accident, they were transferred to Crimson Firmament Blue Wave ship, and the matter of these 2 people was left unsettled. At that time, the little stoic even muttered a few sentences, thinking that Zhang Wudan, who had lost her legs, had long been buried in the belly of a fish at the bottom of the sea. Unexpectedly, she was still alive and well. The Zhang family mother and daughter she encountered this time were Zhang Wudan's mother and younger sister. It had to be said that her ill-fated relationship with the Zhang family truly couldn't be severed. Unfortunately, the Stoic already had no impression of Zhang Wudan. At this moment, Zhang Wudan was sitting in a wheelchair and staring intently at the little Stoic. She couldn't stop trembling all over. You don't remember me? Arbor shook his small head. Zhang Wudan shouted harshly, I'm the person you threw off the ship. You vicious bitch. He watched as a cluster of purple flames rushed towards his face at lightning speed. Madame Zhang, who was standing in front of her son, calmly took out a mirror from her conscience. She abruptly enlarged it and placed it in front of the mother and son, blocking the attack of the purple flame. Insolence! Madame Zhang shrieked harshly. Are you bullying our great Source Island because there's no one left? You've been pressuring us time and time again. Do you want to become enemies with the entire Great Source Island? Madame Zhang sneered and looked up at Emolien. Young one, I advise you not to test Great Source Island's bottom line time and time again. I'm also advising you to have your son clean his mouth. If I hear him insult my wife again, I'll have him die. Emolien flicked his sleeve coldly as he stared at the middle-aged woman before him with an incomparably frigid expression. For some reason, the woman felt her entire body tremble, and a twisted light surfaced in her eyes. She abruptly dashed to grab Arbor's arm. This bitch injured my son to this extent. I want her to stay by my Dan-er's side for the rest of her life and serve him well. This little bitch injured my son to this extent, so shouldn't she compensate him? My son's entire life was ruined by her, so she should use the rest of her life to compensate my son. Go to hell. Emolien's eyes hardened. She threw out a dragon-shaped purple flame, which rushed towards Madame Zhang's chest. What a shameless bitch. How dare he try to steal his wife? There was no need for this woman to exist anymore. He had to send her on her way today. However, Madame Zhang was not afraid at all. She took his attack head-on and was not injured at all. On the contrary, Tai Feng, who was standing beside Zhang Wudan, seemed to have been hit in the chest by a heavy blow. He howled as he flew out of the door and landed heavily on the ground, spitting out a mouthful of blood. Emolien and Xiaomu were taken aback at the same time. Madame Zhang took advantage of the moment when the two of them were stunned and placed her cold, snake-like fingers on Arbor's pulse. However, she didn't expect that it was as if she had landed her hand on a sturdy piece of jade. She didn't manage to seize Xiaomu's pulse at all, and instead, Emolien, who had reacted swiftly, kicked her left leg. Abruptly, a slender dark moon appeared in his hand, and he ruthlessly pierced it through her heart. Tai Feng's blood-curdling scream came from outside the door. Emolien's expression froze. She heard young Master Ding's anxious voice. Could it be that this bitch used a substitute talisman? Be careful. Emolien was just about to carry his wife up and back away when just then, she felt her tentacles touch a barrier. The barrier completely separated the two of them. Chapter 2136. Madame Zhang looked at Arbor strangely and coldly said, Little slut, let's see who can save you today. Saying this, she suddenly flipped her hand and placed a green seed in the palm of her hand. Arbor looked at the seed and for some reason, her eyebrows twitched. An indescribable sense of familiarity welled up in her heart. Madame Zhang used her spiritual energy to stimulate the seed, and the seed surged up at a terrifying speed. Countless green vines with barbs swung at Arbor. Arbor didn't know that a wood spirit master had such a unique skill. Stimulating a seed to attack, unless the seed itself was strong enough, it was just a move that couldn't put out a nearby fire. Xiaomu's expression chilled, and she abruptly shifted backwards, dodging several green vines' attacks. The place she was trapped in was surrounded by walls on all sides. The area was very narrow, and the green vine tentacles could wrap around her. Twice, she was almost hooked by the barbs. Arbor coldly looked at the middle-aged woman standing in front of her with a sinister smile. Although your substitution charm is quite strong, it's far from enough. Arbor sneered at her. Then, without another word, she directly summoned the 9 stars mirroring the moon cauldron in front of the woman and fiercely slammed it against the wall. Boom! Gagaga! Bang! The four walls couldn't withstand a single blow and instantly collapsed. The defensive artifact in front of Madame Zhang's chest also shattered into pieces, turning into fine powder that disappeared into the air. Ugh! Madame Zhang screamed. On the other side, Emo Lien had already rushed over. Her handsome face was calm, and dark moon flung at her face like lightning. Madame Zhang hurriedly used more spiritual energy to stimulate the seed. The seed extended countless branches and crazily swung in all directions, shattering a wall of Liang Yuan medicine shop. The branch pierced through the shop and entered the cloth shop next door. The shopkeeper screamed and fled with his customers into the street. At this time, most of the people in the pharmacy had also fled. They had fled far away, but they stayed on the street out of curiosity. Many pairs of eyes looked towards Liang Yuan Pharmacy. Madame Zhang seemed to have gone completely crazy. The seed was embedded in her palm, and while it was constantly absorbing spiritual energy, it was more like it was absorbing her flesh and spirit meridians. Xiao Mu glanced at this crazy woman and said coldly, "Take this move of mine." As soon as he finished speaking, he threw out the small cauldron in his hand. It turned into a flowing light in midair and turned into a huge object, pressing down on Madame Zhang's head. Madame Zhang was so frightened that her liver and guts turned cold. She scrambled to the ground, rolled to the side, and dodged the attack. Just as he collapsed to the ground, he felt the medicinal cauldron heavily smashing into the ground, crushing countless green vines. Ugh! This pressure seemed to be pressing on her bones and blood, as if the left side of her body was completely crushed and fractured. Madame Zhang's sharp voice floated above the medicine shop. Zhang Wudan, who was sitting at the door, saw that the situation was not good. He hurriedly pushed his wheelchair to escape. However, there was a small threshold at the door. When he came in, it was naturally Tai Feng who pushed him in. When he went out, he was in a panic and couldn't escape immediately. Zhang Wudan used all his strength to push the wheelchair and helplessly looked at Zhang Wuxiang. Chapter 2137. Zhang Wuxiang was also scared out of her wits. She didn't even look at her second brother and immediately ran out of the shop. Wu Jini didn't have any feelings for Zhang Wudan. His biological sister didn't even want to save his second brother, so why should he waste his energy? Therefore, he quickly followed Zhang Wuxiang out of the shop. He originally planned to run back to the Heavenly Fortune sect to get reinforcements, but he stopped halfway and thought to himself, "Those young men and women are so powerful. Even if I go back to get reinforcements now, I'll just be giving away my sect members' lives in vain. It'll be completely useless." Then he dismissed the idea and looked back at Zhang Wuxiang, who was standing at the entrance of the shop and trembling with fear. This girl was too proud and always thought that Great Source Island was invincible. She didn't expect that there were countless people with profound cultivation in the world. Not everyone would give face to Great Source Island. Zhang Wudan looked on in confusion as his sister and brother-in-law ran out of the shop, ignoring him. He opened his mouth to call out, but no sound came out. He was so scared that he almost peed his pants. He trembled and tried to push the wheelchair with all his strength, but the wheelchair refused to budge. In the end, it fell on the door sill and couldn't move up or down. "Where do you think you're going?" A cold voice came from the back of his head. Suddenly, Zhang Wudan was pulled out of the wheelchair by a circle of wood spirits. It was as if he was being pulled by an invisible force. He flew out of the wheelchair and fell heavily at Ding Yun's feet. Ah! Zhang Wudan turned pale with fright as he looked at the young master who was looking at him coldly with drooping eyebrows. Then he hurriedly turned his head to look at his mother, who was wrapped in green vines, and screamed, "Mother, mother, save me, save me." Madame Zhang revealed her face from the green vines. She bared her fangs and brandished her claws and wanted to go forward, but she felt powerless. It was as if her body was completely out of her control. The seed was buried in her blood and bones, and it was firmly absorbing her blood, bones, and strength. Could it be that her soul would be stolen by this seed? When Madame Zhang thought of this, her body couldn't help but tremble slightly. "Mother, mother, save me. Mother, please save me." Ah! Zhang Wudan could feel that the wood spirit energy around her neck was getting tighter and tighter. Her snot, tears, and saliva flowed down together. He begged for mercy and looked pleadingly at Ding Yun, who had a cold expression on his face. He didn't want to die, he didn't want to die. If he had known earlier, he would not have provoked this demoness. Every time he provoked this demoness, he would always be in big trouble. The first time he lost his legs, this time he might lose his life. I regret it so much. Zhang Wudan wept bitterly and wished for nothing more than to kowtow to Ding Yun. Let me go, all right? I won't dare to cause trouble for this young lady again. Katja, why did that crisp sound so familiar? It was the sound of his neck breaking. He was dead. His neck had been broken by the wood's spiritual energy. Madame Zhang, who was wrapped in vines, let out a bitter and hateful scream. The vines around her surged wildly, as if they wanted to inject endless vitality into the cauldron. Arbor frowned and picked up the 9 stars mirroring the moon cauldron. Mo Lien leapt to Arbor's side and held her by the waist. She looked over with a frown. Chapter 2138. Looks like this woman's soul has been stolen by that strange seed, Mo Lien said after a moment's thought. Master, I can sense Qiuqiu's aura from that seed, little water Dian suddenly said. Bang! A transparent water child squatted on Arbor's shoulder and glared at that strange vine. You were right, Master. After coming out, the feeling became even stronger. This is a fragment of a holy wood seed. Arbor! Exclamation point. What do you mean? Miss Qiao caught the words holy wood. You mean that Qiuqiu really isn't an ordinary little tree, but one of the 5 spirit origins, the holy wood? The water child looked at Arbor in shock and asked in shock, Master, you don't know? Arbor's face was expressionless as he slapped the water child's head and retorted, What do you think your master doesn't know? How can I not know? In fact, she had only suspected it before, but today she was sure that Qiuqiu really was one of the 5 spirit origins, the holy wood. Then just now you... She looked extremely shocked. What did I say just now? Arbor snapped. I didn't say anything. Mo Lien couldn't help but laugh. The little fellow's bad habit of being stubborn and refusing to admit his mistakes resurfaced again. Miss Qiao's current state of mind was naturally. Damn. Qiuqiu, why didn't you tell me that it wasn't an ordinary piece of wood? It's the most powerful holy wood in the world? You did it on purpose, right? Fortunately, Qiuqiu was in seclusion right now. Otherwise, Miss Qiao would probably drag him out and beat him up. Master, you used to call it little tree, little tree, little tree. Could it be that you didn't think it was a holy wood at all? It had to be said that the water child was telling the truth. But would his master really admit that he was uncultured just like that? Impossible. Arbor retorted exasperatedly, Do you think I'm stupid? Qiuqiu was blessed by the heavens and formed its own star domain. Naturally, it's extraordinary and completely different from ordinary wood. In the blink of an eye, he saw Ding Yun tossing Zhang Wudan's corpse aside and walking over. Arbor then shut up and never mentioned the sapling again. The water baby also disappeared from her shoulder. The two of them used their telegnosis abilities to talk to each other. How do I subdue it? Did you just say that this is Qiuqiu's seed fragment? What does that mean? Master, you don't know? The little water baby asked blankly. Qiuqiu was once seriously injured. At that time, it was on the verge of breaking apart. The entire tree had exploded. Although the main body survived, it should only be half a piece of dead wood at that time. Arbor's heart skipped a beat. It was as if the endless void flashed before his eyes. A piece of dead wood and a small white figure drifted together for many years. Tears welled up in her eyes. Master Silver, if we can absorb this seed fragment, then the little tree will definitely wake up tomorrow. What should we do? Arbor's spirit was lifted. Master Silver, jump in. The little water baby said solemnly, Jump into that circle wrapped in vines. That tree is causing trouble right now, but in essence, it won't hurt you. Arbor clenched her small fists tightly. Alright. Jojo, what are you doing? Mo Lien saw that she didn't speak for a long time and knew that she was communicating with the little water baby through her telegnosis. She didn't disturb them. Chapter 2139. But now, seeing her pause in her steps as if she was about to rush toward the vines, he subconsciously grabbed her small hand tightly. Lien, trust me. Arbor turned to look at him. Mo Lien's heart skipped a beat. He felt that her eyes were especially bright and dazzling at this moment, like a ball of fire that illuminated the entire shack. It made him feel that there was no way such a cute girl could exist in this world. All right. Mo Lien loosened his grip on the little girl's hand slightly. He naturally trusted her. When he saw her separated by the barrier just now, he didn't panic at all. Because he knew that she didn't need to hide under anyone's wings and be provided for like a quail. She was a little girl who could fly side by side with him. She would definitely be able to deal with all the dangers and difficulties. Letting go at the right time and allowing her to grow up quickly was the best way to protect and love her. Miss Chiao smiled at Prince Mo, her eyes extremely bright. Her stoic face suddenly revealed a smile that was as if ice and snow had melted and spring had returned to the earth. Prince Mo was instantly entranced by it. Young Master Ding, who was standing at the side, looked at them with an uncertain expression. It would be a lie to say that he wasn't jealous. There was always a special aura between these two, as if even a nail couldn't penetrate it. At the same time that it made people envious, they couldn't help secretly feeling jealous. Arbor quickly ran to Madame Zhang's side, who was wrapped in vines. Seeing this, Ding Yun's face darkened. He flashed to Mo Lien's side and couldn't help but angrily rebuke, "You're just going to watch her die like this? Wasn't that tree a bit strange?" Madame Zhang's cultivation wasn't low, but she was still taken in by the tree as a vessel. Now that her soul had been seized by the tree, her bones, blood, and strength had all turned into nourishment for the tree. Even so, Mo Lien was still willing to let the little girl come into close contact with the tree? Wasn't he worried or afraid? Mo Lien didn't really want to pay attention to him. He only glanced at him indifferently and said coldly, "My wife doesn't need an outsider like you to worry about her." Young Master Ding sneered, "Do you think I want to worry about it? If it weren't for..." Ding Yun lowered his eyes and bit his thin lips. "If you hadn't met Xiao Xiao before I did, I don't know whose turn it would be to say, 'My wife doesn't need outsiders to worry about her.'" Mo Lien seemed to have read his mind. She glared at him fiercely and said, "The so-called improper desire is to do everything you can to get something that doesn't belong to you. If you can't get what you want, it's quite painful. It's better to let go early." "It's easy for you to say." Ding Yun suddenly turned his head, and the anger in his enchanting eyes had faded at this moment. Only a faint calmness and faint provocation remained. "If it was you, what would you do? Will you obediently give in and live happily ever after?" Mo Lien's eyes hardened. "I don't need to answer such hypothetical questions." His JoJo could only belong to him. There were no assumptions. Ding Yun revealed a mocking smile. "To put it bluntly, it's because we're on different sides. That's why you said such heartless words." On the other hand, when Xiao Mu leaped into the green vine's encirclement, she was met with a shriveled skeleton's gaping, ugly mouth that was poking straight at her. If it were anyone else, they would naturally be scared to the point of screaming. 6 chapters first, for chapters at night as usual. Chapter 2140. However, Miss Chiao, who was familiar with medicine and had studied the human body's meridians, didn't feel anything. She only frowned in disgust and waved her hand to destroy the skeleton. It was really trying to steal a chicken only to end up losing the rice used to lure it. She originally wanted to strengthen herself, but she ended up becoming food for the sapling's fragments. She really didn't know what to say about this Madame Zhang. She was happy that things had turned out this way. Her second son was gone and her daughter had run away. In the future, her husband would marry another wife and her stepmother would enter the family. Zhang Wuxiang wouldn't have such a good life anymore. However, all of this had nothing to do with Arbor. At this moment, she was slowly pacing in the center of the tree's branches as if she was taking a leisurely stroll. She wasn't worried at all that the sapling seed clone would suck her into pieces. She raised her hand to touch the vine beside her. It was a familiar feeling, very familiar. No wonder when Madame Zhang took out the seed, the aura it emitted was so strong that it made her heart jump. It turned out that her Qiuqiu was here. "Hey, big sister." Suddenly, a small voice came from the side. However, Miss Qiao, who was familiar with medicine and had studied the human body's meridians, didn't feel anything. She only frowned in disgust and waved her hand to destroy the skeleton. This Madame Zhang really tried to steal a chicken only to end up losing the rice used to lure it. She originally wanted to strengthen herself, but she ended up becoming food for the sapling. She really didn't know what to say about this Madame Zhang. She was happy that things had turned out this way. Her second son was gone and her daughter had run away. In the future, her husband would marry another wife and her stepmother would enter the family. Zhang Wuxiang wouldn't have such a good life anymore. However, all of this had nothing to do with Arbor. At this moment, she was slowly pacing in the center of the tree's branches as if she was taking a leisurely stroll. She wasn't worried at all that the sapling seed clone would suck her into pieces. She raised her hand to touch the vine beside her. It was a familiar feeling, very familiar. No wonder when Madame Zhang took out the seed, the aura it emitted was so strong that it made her heart jump. It turned out that her Qiuqiu was here. "Hey, big sister." Suddenly, a small voice came from the side. It was soft and weak, sounding a bit ethereal. Arbor suddenly turned around and chased after the source of the sound. She saw a little boy who was about 4 or 5 years old. He had red lips and white teeth and was very cute. He was squatting in the bushes and looking at her with a pair of pitiful watery eyes. Arbor's heart skipped a beat. He quickened his pace and walked towards him. She stopped 10 steps away from him and waved her hands at him. "Come." The little boy didn't move. He just looked at her with an expectant and innocent gaze. "Come here, sister." A green vine suddenly drilled out of Arbor's sleeve and coiled around the boy's waist with a whoosh. However, she heard the boy cry out in surprise. Like a cannonball, he crashed into her arms. Wah! The little boy fell into her arms with a plop and was about to struggle. However, he found that his 4 limbs were all entangled by the vines. He was like a small silkworm cocoon, completely unable to exert any strength as he was bound by the wooden vines. "You want to play dirty with me, your sister, right?" Arbor lightly flicked his head. "Do you think you can play me?" The little boy looked at him pitifully and subconsciously stretched out his 2 hands that were as white as fat radishes to cover his forehead. Chapter 2141. Qiuqiu. Arbor stroked his little head lovingly. "What about you? Don't be naughty, okay? Do you know how uncomfortable I've been during this period of time? Hurry and wake up." The little boy suddenly trembled and curled up. His voice sounded especially fragile. You want me to disappear too? Disappear? Could it be that Qiuqiu's seed fragment had already developed a weak intelligence? This was a bit troublesome. Arbor frowned slightly and looked down at the child lying obediently in the crook of her arm. In the depths of his large eyes, there were traces of pitiful moisture. In addition, there was also a hint of distrust. Arbor put him down and squatted in front of him. She raised her hand and stroked his head. "When you attacked me in the barrier just now, you didn't use your full strength, right?" Previously, she was locked in the defensive barrier by Madame Zhang with a divine weapon. With Qiuqiu's ability, he could definitely hit her in one strike, even if he was just a seed fragment. It could be seen that in the depths of his heart, he was unwilling to hurt her at all. Although he retained a faint trace of intelligence, overall, he was still a part of Qiuqiu's main body. "Sister, if I return to my position, I will disappear." When the child spoke of his sadness, his tears fell. Arbor reached out and pulled his little head into her arms. She stroked him and said, "How can that be? You and the main body are connected and are originally one. After you return to your position, you will just become him and he will become you. Moreover, we can play together." Arbor straightened his little head and looked at the child in front of her seriously. "Otherwise, I can only find a hole to bury you and let you become a half-baked tree." The little tree blinked pitifully. What do you mean, half-baked tree? You have lost the strength of your main body. Even if I plant you, after 300 to 500 years, thousands of years, you will only be in the form of a child. You understand, don't you? Tears welled up in the little boy's eyes. He curled himself into a ball and squatted on the ground. He said pitifully, "Will it hurt to return to my position?" Arbor rolled her eyes at the sky and lifted the child up. "Remove the vines around here. Sister, can you remember my name?" My name is Little too." Arbor, could it be that Chiochio's seed fragment has more than one piece? Arbor muttered to herself. From his tone, could it be that there is a third, fourth, and fifth? The boy sniffed. "After I return to my position, sister?" Xiao Mu sighed in amusement. "You and Chiochio are originally one, so sister naturally loves and misses you very much." The boy wiped his tears. "In the future, if you meet Little 3 and the others, if they don't return to their positions, will you kill them?" Xiao Mu was startled and speechlessly shook her head. "Of course not." Then what if I don't return to my position today?" "I said I will dig a hole and bury you." Arbor flicked him on the head. "Do you think I am a homicidal maniac? I can hurt anyone, but I will never hurt the people I care about. Chiochio, you are also one of the people I care about." The little boy's face instantly glowed with vigor and light. He threw himself into Arbor's arms and shouted, "Sister." Arbor was almost knocked to the ground by him. Chapter 2142. Looking down, she saw that the child's body was emitting rays of lush green light, which slowly flowed into her body. That feeling was unusually warm and made her feel happy and encouraged. Arbor narrowed her eyes and subconsciously reached out to hug the child in her arms, until he dissipated into rays of white light and disappeared into her arms with a smile. When she opened her eyes, Arbor discovered that she had already escaped from the vines. A wisp of lustrous green with spiritual energy slid around her wrist, and her body seemed to be surging with endless power. Arbor's body swayed slightly, and Emo Lien hurriedly reached out to support her. "Seclusion, seclusion." Arbor spat out these words with difficulty. At this moment, the little fellow felt that the spiritual energy in her body was surging, and she could barely form a proper sentence. Emo Lien immediately panicked and hurriedly reached out to pick her up, flying out of Shantian City. The urgent matter at hand was to find a quiet place for the little girl to cultivate in seclusion. Otherwise, if the spiritual energy rampaged in her body, it would easily affect her body. Ding Yun's gaze darkened as he watched the two fly away. He frowned and glanced at them, then turned to look at shopkeeper Chiu, who was standing solemnly beside him. Shopkeeper Chiu quivered and glanced at the bare walls of his shop. He said with a sullen face, "Master, I'll go buy a new batch of goods now." That girl was too much of a scammer, emptying their shop in an instant. "No need." Ding Yun waved his hand disapprovingly. "We were going to move the shop in the first place. Sort out the accounts for the past few years, and I'll send someone to collect them in a few days." Shopkeeper Chiu was taken aback, then nodded repeatedly. "Prepare to go to the Divine Continent with Ba Shan." But old madam." Ding Yun glanced at him indifferently. "It's fine. If mother has thought it through, she'll go herself. We just have to take care of our own matters." Shopkeeper Chiu knew that the knot in the hearts of the mother and son was very heavy, so he didn't try to persuade them any further. He nodded and said, "All right, young master. This old man will make some preparations in the next few days and go ahead first." Ding Yun nodded and didn't say anything further. He turned around and strode out of the door before looking up at the distant sky that was like jade water, and his gaze was gloomy and difficult to understand as he glanced deeply at it. "Jojo, even if you don't remember anything, it doesn't matter." "So?" The guard only saw a black light flash past his eyes. When he rubbed his eyes and looked again, all he saw was a blue sky and white clouds. There was nothing there. Emo Lien carried Arbor and quickly came to the forest outside the city. He found a place with an open field of vision and placed her on the ground. He waved his hand and set up a defensive barrier. Arbor closed his eyes and sank into his star domain. His spiritual sense avatar turned into a speck of light. Just as it sank into his dantian, he saw that the sapling seemed to have been injected with a quickening agent. Branches were growing horizontally from the trunk, and green leaves were also growing densely. Arbor was very happy to see this. He stared at his Chiochio without blinking. His spiritual sense avatar jumped under the tree and circled around it. He clasped his hands behind his back and looked up at the branches and leaves at the top of the tree. The sapling grew strong and healthy in an instant. This was officially entering the growth stage. Arbor was overjoyed. She felt the spiritual power in his body skyrocket, so he hurriedly closed his eyes and directed the spiritual power in his body to the spirit meridian without any distractions. For a moment, the wind and clouds surged, and the weather changed abruptly. Chapter 2144. In the future, if she were to ascend to the immortal realm, she would have to go through the 5 spirits reincarnation trial. If the heavenly Tao would be furious and kill this little demon in front of her. Mo Lien supported her chin with her hand and tilted her head slightly as she stared intently at the little girl. At this moment, it was as if the wind had stopped. Everything around them seemed to turn illusory, and time seemed to be frozen here in his phoenix eyes. In his line of sight, there was only her. 7 days later, the little girl opened her slightly dazed eyes and jumped up. She immediately saw a handsome man outside the defensive barrier, his green robes fluttering in the wind and a slight smile on his lips. With a wave of his finger, Mo Lien removed the defensive boundary around her and teleported to her front. He stretched out his arms and pulled her tightly into his embrace. Sighing softly, he raised his palm to caress her a few times. "My Jojo, your husband has missed you so much." The little girl moved her head in his water and extended a small fist. She clenched it and cheered, "Lien, I feel like my entire body is filled with great power. TSK, little fellow, you've ascended 3 levels in a single bound. Of course you're filled with great power now." Ji Chen sighed softly. The two of them looked back and saw Ji Chen, little Taisui, Dao Wuji, and the others slowly walking over. Arbor hurriedly checked her cultivation, and her eyes immediately lit up. "I've ascended." Mo Lien couldn't help but laugh. "You've been in seclusion for 7 days. It's not as simple as ascending. Your spiritual sense has also grown quite a bit." Arbor looked again and nodded. "I've become a 7th-rank spirit master. My spiritual sense has also grown quite a bit." Most importantly, she had broken through to the 7th level of the soul chapter. Now she could cultivate her 7th branch meridian. At this moment, she felt that her body was filled with spiritual power and was very powerful. Mo Lien looked at her with a gentle gaze and nodded. This ascension went quite smoothly. "Let's go back first." Arbor grunted and turned to look at Ji Chen and the others. "Why is everyone here? How can we not come? You've caused such a big commotion and attracted many people to investigate. Fortunately, we acted in time and helped you block all those random people. Otherwise, you wouldn't have been able to live such a peaceful life these past 7 days." Arbor nodded in realization. "Thank you for your help. Let's go back first." With a wave of his hand, he brought out several vigorous horses from Paradise Planet. He used it as a means of transportation. Everyone wanted to return to the city in a low-key manner so that they wouldn't attract too much attention while riding the dragon and phoenix. Who would have thought that this group of men and women would be eye-catching to begin with? As a result, when they entered the city, they attracted the attention of many young men and women. With the city gate completely blocked off, Mo Lien's party ultimately had no choice but to abandon their horses and scurry onto the roofs, fleeing in defeat by leaping onto eaves and vaulting over walls. When they returned to the inn, everyone saw that Hu Jinshan's sleeves had been pulled off by 2 young ladies who were like wolves and tigers. They couldn't help but point at him and laugh loudly. Miss Chiao was baffled. What were those people doing on the street just now? The corner of Mo Lien's mouth twitched secretly. As he spoke, he lifted his sleeve to wipe Mo Lien's cheek. That aunt just now spoke so loudly and looked so agitated. Her saliva almost sprayed on your face. "So dirty. Did you hear what she said clearly?" Everyone. Chapter 2145. Jojo, you don't know why they're chasing us? Dao Wuji felt that there was a need to discuss this issue with his sister-in-law. He kept feeling that boss seemed to be very bitter about chasing his wife from afar. Arbor glanced askance at him and gazed at him with a, "Are you an idiot?" expression. "How could I not know? They're chasing me because they want to rob me, of course. Everyone." Mo Lien couldn't help but facepalm. She suddenly recalled the incident with the fourth princess. It was the same trick with different people, but the little fellow always thought that they were chasing her for the sake of robbing her. That was why she beat up the fourth princess, Mo Shuang, back then. So shouldn't those passers-by thank themselves that they were actually weaklings that Jojo couldn't be bothered to lay a hand on them? Isn't it because we're beautiful? The peony fairy couldn't resist teasing. Arbor blinked and turned to look at Mo Lien. He asked with a frown, just like how Mo Shuang chased after eldest Qin back then? And like how a flock of orioles and swallows chased after Omega Kotoku? She recalled that when she first applied to enter the Qin estate, she also encountered a bunch of mentally abnormal people who chased after Omega Kotoku and screamed crazily. They were simply sick. This type of person is sick. Arbor said expressionlessly, according to the liver meridian, depression or sudden mental stimulation are abnormal emotional problems. The liver meridian will block meridian qi, and ultimately, the virus will invade the entire body. Everyone, everyone laughed like idiots, but they still looked at Prince Mo sympathetically. Brother, you've worked hard. It wasn't easy chasing after the crown princess, right? He must have accumulated several lifetimes worth of good fortune to be able to chase the stoic face home. The little stoic's train of thought was truly amazing. In her opinion, the reason why she chased after the beautiful men was because she was mentally stimulated, her liver was blocked, and she was in pain. Everyone laughed so hard that their teeth were visible. The little stoic was expressionless. She didn't know what was so funny. As a result, the group of people laughed and laughed, but when they saw the stoic face above them, they inexplicably couldn't continue laughing. Arbor glanced at Hu Jechen and the others, then silently turned around and walked upstairs. "Follow me." Everyone rubbed their noses speechlessly, nodded, and followed her to the second floor. After entering the room, Arbor turned to Mo Lien and said, "Husband?" Mo Lien nodded knowingly. A layer of defensive enchantment fell down and covered the entire room. Little Tai Sui then flicked its finger to reinforce the defensive barrier on top of it. Hence, Xiao Mu had the sapling drag everyone inside. As soon as they entered Paradise Planet, Arbor didn't have time to explain anything to everyone. Arbor's eyes lit up as he rushed towards a little tray ant. That's right, Qiuqiu had consumed the profound spirit jade for a long time and absorbed the entire spirit realm on the island. 7 days ago, it had fused with the seed fragment and finally awakened. Furthermore, it had entered the early stages of growth. The little tray ant also waved its branches and excitedly ran towards its master. The adorable little tray ant widened its round, bean-like eyes, and tears were about to flow out. It raised its arms and ran towards Arbor while shouting, "Master, Master, I want a hug." A smack landed on the little Trent's head. Qiuqiu tilted its head in bewilderment and looked at its little master. After not seeing him for so long, shouldn't Master be hugging and kissing him? Chapter 2148. Chasing her own disciple through the night and killing 2 maidservants. Such a big matter, yet there was not the slightest bit of news. Fairy Yellow Crane said dejectedly, "She's really amazing, smoothing out everything." Hearing this, Arbor couldn't help but raise her hand to pat her head. "Yellow Crane, don't be discouraged." After a pause, she looked at her seriously and asked, "But your master, she's doomed to self-destruction for doing evil. If there comes a day when I want to find trouble with her..." Fairy Yellow Crane drooped her head and sighed softly. "I know." Arbor walked in front of her and pulled her to sit down. "There's something you probably don't know yet. The reason why there are corpse puppets running rampant in the world is not a coincidence, but someone deliberately did it. The organization behind all this is called Heavenly Fate. The brainless people in the organization may be spread all over the world. Arbor held Yellow Crane's hand and said, "What we can confirm now is, your master, Feng Shi, and Shuntian Prefecture's Prefecture Lord, Gung Pengcheng, are all members of Heavenly Fate. However, the current Shuntian Prefecture's Prefecture Lord, Gung Pengcheng, has already been replaced by our people." Yellow Crane listened silently, and suddenly widened her eyes. Prefecture Lord Gung? He's one of you. The little fellow nodded her little head proudly. There's no longer any Prefecture Lord Gung in the world. That old fellow. Thinking about how that dog still wanted to trick her even in death and refused to reveal the name of the mastermind behind the Mu family, Arbor couldn't help but frown slightly. Shuntian Prefecture's Prefecture Lord is one of us now. His name is Dunji. Arbor said, "I'll inform you that if you see this Prefecture Lord's strange actions in the future, you don't have to make a fuss." Fairy Yellow Crane silently closed her gaping mouth, feeling that this matter was rather miraculous. Jojo and the others were really resourceful people. They could even deal with Shuntian Prefecture's Prefecture Lord. Then does my master know? She doesn't know. Arbor shook her head, then pondered for a moment and said, "Actually, I can't be sure. Maybe your master is a clever person and has already seen through all of this. It's not impossible." Huang He nodded and said indifferently, "Yes, she is indeed intelligent." Then he smiled bitterly. "Even my disciple doesn't know what she's thinking in the depths of her heart. How could she be so ruthless as to turn her own disciple into a strange corpse puppet? Huang He, maybe she wants to make you stronger so that she can use you?" Fairy Yellow Crane was stunned for a moment before nodding. That was indeed what she said back then. She even said that Senior Sister was useless. However, she had single-handedly controlled Senior Sister Lingfei and turned her into a monster. How could she blame Senior Sister Lingfei for being useless? What kind of logic is this? Arbor sneered. The Heavenly Fate cult has always been dedicated to researching drugs that can change the human body. In the beginning, this medicine only worked on corpses. Now, it can even work on living bodies. This shows that it has improved a lot. Fairy Yellow Crane's body trembled slightly. I still don't quite understand. It's simple. This improved medicine is spread by the night cowbirds. Once the human body touches it, it will automatically enter your bones and blood. From the beginning of the mutation of corpses to the current mutation of living bodies, it's all for one purpose, to give birth to powerhouses with special abilities. Succeed or die trying. Arbor's grip on Huang He's hand tightened slightly. Chapter 2149. This kind of medicine can make the human body stronger. Once it's eliminated, it'll turn into a monster that's neither human nor ghost. Madame Feng's words kept echoing in Fairy Yellow He's ears. Only now did she come to a realization. Her voice trembled as she asked, This is a 50-50 chance? How can there be a 50-50 chance of success? Look at how many zombies there are in the world. How many special ability users can there be? So, the chance is actually only 1 in 10. Fairy Yellow He asked in shock and anger. 1 in 10? I'm afraid that's overestimating it. Arbor sighed. He understood why Fairy Yellow He was so angry. Her master, who was so close to her, was sending her disciple to her death for this 1 in 10 chance. This kind of feeling was very terrible. Fairy Yellow He silently lowered her head and laughed bitterly. Sure enough, if you're not ruthless, you can't achieve great things. Arbor held her hand. Everything is in the past. But what I want to tell you is that Tian Yun and I can't coexist. So one day, we'll definitely go to war with your master. And that day was probably coming soon. Fairy Yellow He raised her head and looked at her with a determined gaze. Madame Feng is no longer my master. That night, she cut off our master-disciple relationship with her own hands. How can I still acknowledge someone who wants to kill me as my master? Fairy Yellow He said softly. I can't do it. Don't worry, Jojo. I won't be a burden to our team. When it comes to my firm stance, I won't miss a single point. Arbor pursed his lips and nodded. He patted Fairy Yellow He's shoulder lightly and said in a relaxed tone, I'm going to refine the spirit-gathering pill. Do you want to watch from the side? Yes. When she was downstairs, she had heard Fairy Ginkgo mention that Xiao Xiao was refining pills upstairs. That was why she had hurriedly rushed up. She couldn't miss such a good opportunity to watch him refine pills. Jojo, you can refine black-level pills now? Arbor nodded. Yes, I can occasionally refine a few earth-level pills. But it's not very stable. Wow! Fairy Yellow Crane had an expression of worship on her face. She hurriedly stood up, walked to her side, and circled around the 9 stars mirroring the moon cauldron. I am now a black-grade alchemist. Jojo, what about you? Since you can refine earth-grade medicinal pills, then you must be an earth-grade alchemist. I don't know. Arbor said with a confused face, I can only refine a few earth-level pills from time to time. Sometimes they work, sometimes they don't. They can only be considered as profound-level pills. Wang He stopped in his tracks, blinking as he stared at her and asked, Could it be that you've never gone to the pill house to appraise your alchemist rank? Arbor shook his head in confusion. Do I need to appraise it? Wang He's eyes almost popped out of their sockets as he stammered, Of course, we have to appraise it. If you don't appraise it, how would the world know that Shuntian Prefecture has another Earth-grade alchemist? After the appraisal, even if I go to the upper 3 prefectures in the future, I can get a 50% discount when I go to the pill house to buy medicinal herbs. Why didn't you say so earlier? Arbor patted his chest with a pained expression. Previously, I went to the medicine shop on the street to buy a lot of medicinal herbs. Lotus flowers cost tens of millions of spirit coins. Huang He. When we alchemists go to the pill house to buy things, the higher the rank of the alchemist, the greater the discount. You didn't know? Chapter 2150. How could I possibly know? Huang He, that you're blaming me for being uncultured? But now I know. Arbor reached out and took a medicinal herb, grinding it in his hands. But I've already spent an astronomical price to buy a bunch of medicinal herbs. Huang He could not help but laugh. It's fine, Prince Imo has money. Even if he had money, this was not how he should spend it. Thinking that if he went to the pill house to buy the herbs, the price would be reduced by half, Jojo felt like his heart was bleeding. The two refined in the room for an entire afternoon. Huang He was naturally in awe of Qiao Mu's pill refining speed. This little guy could actually refine several cauldrons of spirit-gathering pills in one afternoon, and even refined quite a lot of spirit-returning medicinal liquid. After seeing Jojo's refining speed, he was definitely going to be devastated. Huang He was very depressed and did not recover for a long time. It was all because Qiaonan was too fierce. The two came out of the room at 10 in the evening. Huang He held a small box in her hand, immersed in the scene of refining pills just now, unable to pull herself out. While eating, she was somewhat absent-minded. Seeing her intoxicated look, everyone could not be bothered to disturb her. They saw her stuffing food into her mouth from time to time, looking like she was in a daze. Arbor could not help but feel a little helpless. He raised his hand and patted Huang He's shoulder. Eat properly. She was almost swallowing the spoon. Fairy Huang He was in a daze for a while, and was awakened by Arbor's pat. She came back to her senses and looked at everyone. Only then did she realize that she was sitting in front of a dining table made up of 2 long tables. Fairy Huang He revealed a strange expression. Eat already? Everyone was speechless for a moment. Fairy Ginkgo giggles, you're so silly. Eat properly, don't think about refining pills. Huang He's face was full of yearning. I learned a lot from Jojo's refining process today. I have to quickly finish eating and return to my room to meditate. As she spoke, Huang He had already quickly pulled out the rice in her bowl. Everyone. Jojo, how do you feel after advancing? Right. Fairy Yellow Crane turned to look at her. I forgot to ask you. I heard from Sister Ginkgo that you actually spent 7 days advancing outside Shuntian City. She looked her up and down. I can't tell what realm you're in. Are you a level 5 spiritual master now? Huang He, let me tell you some shocking news. Chen unhurriedly opened the fan in his hand and said with a smile, "Our Jojo has been promoted to a level 7 soul master." Huang He's mouthful of rice was all sprayed on the transparent barrier that had suddenly erected in front of her. Everyone was speechless. "Don't you think this venerable peach blossom immortal is so mean?" He knew that it would agitate the little girl, yet he still told her. At the same time, he had already set up a barrier in front of Huang He, allowing her to spout whatever she wanted. Ha! The peony fairy laughed so hard that she held her belly. "Oh, don't make me laugh to death. You can inherit my fields." Huang He hurriedly wiped his mouth and looked at Arbor in disbelief. "You actually leaped to the 7th rank all of a sudden?" Such a ferocious advancement speed made people feel very scared. Arbor couldn't help but look helpless. Occasionally. Hearing that, Huang He breathed a sigh of relief. "That's good. If you constantly advance like this, wouldn't you be ascending to the heavens?" Everyone couldn't help but laugh, looking at Little Yellow Crane with a strange expression. Little Yellow Crane was really an honest person. You're tuning in to the Passion Pages YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.